There are two wolves fighting in a man's heart. One is called love, the other, hate.
Hello, and welcome to Medieval, a medieval pop culture podcast, where we talk about how medieval and medieval-inspired movies, TV, and books depict the medieval world. What did they get right? What did they get wrong? And what do they tell us about how modern people see the medieval past? I'm Sarah Ifstecker, a medieval historian, and today I am joined by another medieval historian, Professor Marita von Weissenberg, to talk about the movie Pathfinder. Hello.
Hello.
Would you like to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and about why you wanted to talk about this particular movie?
I'm an associate professor at Xavier University in glorious Cincinnati, Ohio. My research focuses on sort of late medieval religion and masculinity and how within sort of Catholic narrative of the saints, masculinity is used to tell the story of sanctity, but what also this can tell us about religious men's and religious people's sort of ideation of masculinity. In my copious teaching time, which is of course always more than the research, I teach a bunch of courses, a lot about saints, but I am also, my first job ever was, I was 18 years old and I did a summer job at a Viking museum in southwestern Finland. I'm from Finland. And so I never sort of been like super into Vikings, maybe because that's not sort of a really big thing in Finland. Of course, it's maybe bigger there than here. Well, in a different way here. Here you have the kind of a lot more creepy, historically inaccurate obsession with Vikings. Well, it's like closer to home in Finland. And so I never really thought about this. This was not my big thing. Like the 12th century was my big thing. I was really interested in medieval stuff. I've also at 18, I knew everything there is to know about the Middle Ages and there's nothing you could tell me. So the Vikings were sort of like something new. It was before my period. Then I went to university, didn't study anything about Vikings, learned that in fact, I know very little about the Middle Ages and could then dedicate my life to like learning more about it, expertise, knowing more and more about less and less until you know absolutely everything about absolutely nothing. And then in graduate school, I was teaching fellow for a course on Vikings. I was head teaching fellow when the course ran again. I was research assistant for a book on Vikings. And I discovered that I actually know a lot about Vikings. And so now at Xavier, I teach a course called Vikings ! After the Yale Vikings course. All Viking courses have, I think, globally been called Vikings !
Yeah, I like the punctuation.
I mean, if I need to ask people, why do you take this class? They're like, the exclamation mark. I always think that my sort of flagship courses are my courses on saints because I think saints are amazing. You've got people like, I don't know, drinking water from leprous baths and stuff. What could possibly be, you know, better than that? The earliest documented case of a pillow fort and the biography of a Hungarian saint. I mean, like, how could this not be the most exciting thing on the planet? But all the students think my flagship course is Vikings! Which could be subtitled myth busting.
Right.
And so wanted to talk about this movie for a couple of reasons. One is that for my Vikings course, I have collected a list of movies, recommended movies, and I have a disclaimer that not all of these are good movies. Most of them are not good movies, in fact. And I love bad movies. Like if I'm like, oh, to my husband, I'm like, oh, we have got to watch this movie. He's like, no. I'm like, why not? Because if you want to watch it and you like it, it's going to be bad. The combination of a movie that I find really satisfying in many ways and talking about it with an expert in portrayals of the weird Middle Ages, the long Middle Ages, what the fuck Middle Ages, was very attractive to me as an idea. And also, I felt like you have not talked about this movie before, and this movie really deserves to be on this podcast.
Absolutely. And of course, one of the inspirations for this podcast was listening to various bad movie podcasts. So when I had the delightful experience of having you and your husband to visit me in Memphis the other week, which will no longer be the other week by the time this is released, but is the other week at the time of recording.
It should be noted that my husband emphatically did not watch the movie. He went and got Memphis style barbecue. So we should probably do a plug in for Central Barbecue. Was that it?
Yes. Central Barbecue. Excellent.
And then he sat and Googled the real estate market in Memphis while we watched this so that he would not have to be subjected to the horror that is Pathfinder, the movie.
But we watched Pathfinder, the movie. A few details about Pathfinder, the movie. It came out in 2007 and stars Karl Urban as Ghost, otherwise known as Éomer.
Shirtless Éomer is Pathfinder.
Yes.
Is Ghost in
Shirtless,
Pathfinder.
young Éomer.
I
Yes.
think shirtlessness is its own character that should be credited.
I think it should, actually.
Character like ghost, and the next line would be shirtless.
And it also is this really interesting phenomenon that I feel like there are a lot of things said in the medieval and early modern period where you can tell who the main character is by the fact that he has just less shirt than anyone else.
Right.
And so here he's fully shirtless, but there's a lot of movies where it's the main male character. He's got his shirt open like down, like halfway down his chest, whereas everybody else is buttoned up to the neck.
Yes, and in Pathfinder we had the extra bonus. He's shirtless, but then he's also wearing like the stereotypical Native American bad costume loincloth. So we also have a lot of naked thigh and half butt cheeks.
Yeah, we see a lot of Karl Urban.
Yes, we do. The grayscale maybe helps a little bit to dim that.
Right. It also stars Moon Bloodgood as a character who is credited with the name Starfire. I will note she is never referred to by the name Starfire over the course of that movie.
She's never referred to as anything except
she
your daughter.
You.
Right. Mm-hmm. You know, pronouns, always important to pay attention to pronouns, especially if we have nothing else.
So I will note first of all, she is best known for Terminator Salvation. That is her most famous role. I also will note she is not actually an actress of Native American background.
Heilige Scheiße. I totally thought she was. Okay,
I kind of did too. And then like something in the Wikipedia article, I was like, oh, okay. And then, did some digging and she is not.
Okay, well, I completely just assumed that Moon Bloodgood, which is a great name and much better than Starfire, that she was Native American, but I am not an expert, so.
Yeah, according to Wikipedia, she is not. I think just Bloodgood is actually like Dutch or something, and the Moon part is like her parents are hippies.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Isn't it in Terry Pratchett's Good Omens, the main character is named like Pippin Galadriel Moonchild or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
Completely pointless.
That sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yep. Also stars Clancy Brown as our lead Viking gunner, who you can see, or at least, also never named, but you can also see or at least hear his voice in another pseudo-Scandinavian context, since he is the fire giant Surtur in Thor Ragnarok.
I would never have known that. I only known him as the kind of antagonist Kurgan in the 1986 cult classic Highlander, which I look forward to somebody doing on this podcast.
I have not seen that as of yet, but I have seen Thor Ragnarok, and that was the only thing that jumped out to me from his Wikipedia page.
That makes sense.
Yes. We also have Russell Means as Pathfinder, and this I will note is somebody who is actually a Native American actor, and he has played a number of very prominent roles in Last of the Mohicans, and he is in Pocahontas as Chief Powhatan.
Cool. I think he's also a Native American like social justice activist.
Yes, or was, sadly. He actually died in 2012.
Oh
so,
no.
Rest in peace, Russell Means.
Rest in peace, rest in power, insert whatever is appropriate culturally.
Yes. Finally, Kevin Loring as the character who in the film, I was like, oh, his name is the silent one because he's mute. Apparently, according to the credits, his name is Jester, which
makes
if you say so, I suppose. No.
Okay. All right. Okay, then. Great.
Yeah.
Jester doesn't make any sense, like as a name for the character, as a title, or as a tribute to the character to me. While Silent One or Quiet One totally does, because that's what he's called. But what do I know?
Right. And in general, I will also note there are a variety of other characters who I'm not going to get into in just listing the cast because they're not people who I am super familiar with and who have, I would say, in some ways relatively small roles in the film, and none of them are named at any point, including that I think there are definitely two male characters who don't really have personalities, who I'm pretty sure are conflated into one person and might have actually been two people. But again, this is a problem with the fact that nobody has a name and very few people have personalities.
Certainly describes a lot of what's going on in this movie.
Yes. So we can now get into our first main section, the enumeratio or recap. And I'll start with just a very brief recap to orient us, and then we can get into some general discussion of the film. It begins with a Viking expedition that arrives in somewhere in North America, and the sole survivor, who is, I believe, the leader's son, is taken in by a local tribe who give him the name Ghost, I guess, because he's so white. We'll talk about this. 15 years later, another group of Viking raiders arrives and destroys Ghost's village and kills most of its inhabitants, accompanied and occasionally helped by his tribe's Pathfinder, which also is, I guess, a title, really not a name, whatever. Pathfinder's daughter, who is also Ghost's love interest, of course, because she's the only woman in the movie. And, well, no, there's one other woman, but we'll talk about her in a moment. And a mute member of the tribe who also insists upon joining him. Ghost then manages to trick and eventually defeat the Vikings, leaving his people safe for the time being and earning the respect of his tribe.
Yay!
Yay!
Total interesting validation of masculinity, male character development that yet somehow manages to not actually have character development.
And also to ultimately tell the important story about how really the only person who is able to do anything is the one white guy.
Right, exactly.
Interesting.
Great, because it's completely inconceivable that you would have a group of people where hunting and intertribal warfare is like a thing, and actually who have a superior projectile weapon technology than what the Vikings were famous for would have actually been able to save themselves or even find their own butts with both hands and a map. No, we need Karl Urban without a shirt.
Yes, who is genetically able to wield Viking weaponry, as we will get into.
Magically. I mean, genetic coding, I did not do this. I'm so impressed. Like, can I just magically know how to, like, I don't know, do downhill skiing just because, I mean, that's not actually a thing in Finland. So, I mean, it is, but it's not like Norway. Like, cross-country skiing would be the thing in Finland, so, which I do know how to do. So my whole genetic metaphor thing totally fell flat and didn't work.
I have certainly had people ask me about, like, if I can help them with financial things because I'm Jewish. So...
Oh, okay.
I can't, by the way, I can't help you with your finances.
Well, I'll just scratch that off my task, Sarah list. I mean, yeah, wow. People do ask me things about, like, because I'm from Finland, they're like, oh, well, do you speak Russian? And it's like, no. Or they'll be like, so hockey. But I do know enough about hockey that I can deflect any question and be like, talk to my husband, Canadian.
So we start with our opening crawl that informs us that 600 years before Columbus, there was an invasion of ruthless marauders in the Americans. You know, unlike Columbus, obviously.
So unlike Columbus was all teddy bears and sparkles. I mean, really.
Yeah.
And they also talk about, I think the opening credits is something about they're, coming to settle.
Yes.
Which is the only time we get any hint of any kind of settling interest.
They seem to have no interest in settling in terms of what we actually see in the film.
We'll get to that later, but if you think about sort of actual sort of Nordic, Icelandic descriptions of the Norse coming to the Americas, there's actually interest in, if not settlement, at least exploiting resources. Basically, they're not just out there to, as bloodily as possible, kill everyone else. So if they're talking about settlement, you'd think there'd be things like, oh, I don't know, women,
trade,
or tools, or trade. Oh my gosh, trade, how shocking. But no, settlement here equals mindless genocide.
Which, again, is arguably much more characteristic of Columbus's expedition than it is of this one. But we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that more. We also are told that the reason that they were not able to carry out their genocide is that something stopped them, and that what follows is the legend.
And it's like the legend, as if this is like a legend, and presumably
as if we know this,
as if we know this. And I mean, is this a legend told by Native Americans, or is this a legend told by, like, I don't know, the Vikings who survived, who went back home? Although we who have watched the movie know that the Vikings did not survive, which I mean, I have no problems with that, but like the legend, and you're like, okay, so is this like Mel Gibson, this is the real Bible, and people are like, no, this isn't, or is this like, I don't know.
Well, Braveheart too begins with that, like, this, like, historians say this isn't how it happened, but they're wrong. It's like, are we though? Are we? I'm not sure we are.
Are we really? Isn't it nice that we have people like Mel Gibson to tell us we're wrong? Mel Gibson, who reads how many languages, has how many skills in primary source analysis, like how much.
He's basically an expert.
Right. I mean, obviously he spends all his free time sitting in libraries.
And calling people sugar tits. It's, basically divided between those two things.
Sugar tits, reading like medieval manuscripts. I don't know. Which of these is going to give a person?
Anti-Semitism.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what of these are? I mean, on the other hand, anti-Semitism is pretty medieval.
True.
On the other hand, I would hope that among medievalists, you'd have some colleagues who'd be pretty pointed about, like, that is inappropriate and you should just shut the fuck up.
One would hope.
One would hope. One would hope. We live in hope. There's a city in British Columbia called Hope. And so where you're saying, oh, where are you guys going? Oh, we're going to like, I don't know, Calgary. Well, where's that? Beyond Hope. So you can actually say Beyond Hope is a geographic place in British Columbia. Fun fact. Relevance, zero.
Very like Dante-esque, like we're basically going to hell.
Right. In Finland, there's also a location.
No offense to Calgary.
No offense to Calgary, right? But there's actually in Finland, there's Jerusalem and hell or neighboring municipalities, which I also find really entertaining.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
We learned what the legend is. And so we see this white horse, and we learned that there's this idea of this white creature as an omen.
Foot, fleet, was it, how did they express it somehow really? Fleet of foot and white as snow. Dun, dun, dun.
Or white as ghosts.
Mm.
And that this will change everything. So you think this is the horse, but by the end, is it the horse? Or is it a white dude?
Suspense is killing me.
We have a woman who is never named. This will be a trend. Who shows up at the site of a massacre, which my understanding is that the Vikings have been defeated by another tribe.
Yeah, and it's a little bit unclear because first when you see it, it looks like a shipwreck because you have this like a dragon-proud ship.
Yeah.
Everything is also like gray. If you have like a phobia of gray, just do not watch this movie, right? Everything is gray. So they've got this like shades of black and gray, dragon-headed ship and all these people. So really, when I first watched this, and I've watched this movie like multiple times, right? And it wasn't until this time that I watched it with Sarah and under her great influence, I realized that no, there's actually a massacre. But it looks like a shipwreck. Like the shipwreck, and it's kind of been blown onto the shore and everyone's dead. And then later we have a flashback from Ghost when there we learn that it's actually a massacre.
Right. While she's going through this massacre and finding, some gray corpses and all of that, she also finds a child. Yeah.
Go through a alien ship and just like go through it alone. And, you have suddenly like corpses that shift and, land in her face and she screams. Like I would totally continue going through there.
Yeah, definitely. But I guess it's good that she does because she finds a child who clearly has been through a lot. We can tell that he's been whipped and he also is kind of freaking out. He holds up a sword at her, which he does not seem to know how to use at this point, which I think is interesting. And
important for later.
Important. She does convince him to drop it and takes him with her. Yay. And at first her tribe is hesitant to take him in. They describe him as an evil spirit that has never seen the sun. He's white, everybody. He's very white.
I mean, I wonder to what extent that sort of emphasizes his whiteness, or to what extent that sort of plays on this idea of, the Northmen, Vikings.
Right.
I mean, if we're, a discerning audience who has not read the back cover of the DVD,
right,
we might not realize, that this is people from the North. This is fight dragon ships and stuff like that. But anyway.
And our horned helmets cough.
Except I don't think we've seen any of the horned
helmets.
Oh, we
haven't? Oh, okay.
I don't think at this point we haven't seen horned helmets,
They agree that, it would be really mean to not take in the child, and also that destiny means that they should take in the child and all that. So they agree to it. He is able to grow up and in this tribe. Oh, and we do also have the flashback, which indicates that the reason why he was whipped is because his bad dad, Viking dad, got mad at him because he wouldn't murder a child. Which is where we discover it's a massacre. Ghost refuses to murder a child. Therefore, is there some kind of innate goodness in him? And then he's whipped. But it's also fascinating. We see this after he sort of wakes up. They've been told like, the council is discussing this and they're like, oh, they're expressing this fear that he's going to turn on into, this evil marauder like his father's. And then he's asleep and he kind of starts awake from this nightmare, flashback whipping, and he finds a sword, which of course they very conveniently left by his furs where he's sleeping, because that's totally what I would do. I would leave this like alien sharp object next to a child who's sleeping. He's like, what, 12 maybe? Clearly. And then he goes with the sword and kind of looks over his rescuers, who will become his sort of mom figure and the chieftain dad figure. And then he doesn't kill them, even though there's clearly some kind of a tension. Right. So instead he goes like an angstily. I mean, we're talking German hero metal record cover, angsty, sword point down, leaning on the pommel by the fire. And then the Native American woman who finds him is sort of like, has this like, oh, poor child. And it's like, angsty. And this is actually a moment that is slightly less gray. Right. But don't think it's a positive vibe. And I will also note that I think this is the beginning of this film having what perhaps unintentionally is a deeply muddled message about the extent to which genetics defines who you are.
Mm-hmm. I think that really is a Pathfinder. Genetics. Yes or no, genetics. Is it the solution to everything? Which plays in very problematically into some of the attitudes that particularly white power movements and white supremacists in the United States, but also other parts of the world have about like Vikings and genetics. And I mean, and that's of course just a tip of the iceberg of a broader obsession that we have about genetic patterning.
Mm-hmm.
You'll show up someplace and people are like, oh, you're from Finland. My dad's Swedish. And then I'm like, nej men vad trevligt, varifrån i Sverige? And then like, my great grandfather moved here. I'm like, oh, as a European, that doesn't make any sense.
Like I don't mean that statement. I know Swedish, right?
But it's nice that you can pick from, your however many ancestors and pick that this week I'm going to identify. I mean, some people, of course, it's not just a week by week, but this like over determinism of genetic, like, oh my gosh, I did a, 24andMe test. And it turns out that X percentage of my genetics is whatever. And now I'm going to like Dutch. And now I'm going to start serving gestampemuis when like I have a child or something, like, because that's a Dutch tradition. Right. Which, of course, is really problematic, like this genetic determinism. And then considering we have a huge swath of the population for whom any kind of background has been removed through enslavement. But anyway.
And don't have the option, right, of necessarily knowing precisely what their ancestors' traditions were.
Right, exactly. Right. And yeah, there's this obsession with genetics, which we see in this movie very clearly. I find that very, in many ways, fascinating, but also problematic in modern American culture. Like, yes, it's nice to do a genetic test to find out if my baby is like, do I have to think about possibilities of my child having some kind of a genetic problem? Are they going to be able to be born healthy? I mean, these are interesting questions, but then you have questions of what are we going to do with this information? And And that is, of course, part of this really broad iceberg of genetic obsession, which I completely agree with you is really a big part of this movie.
I will say also my parents have had their, 23andMe things. And, my dad is very smug at the fact that it was exactly what he expected based on his genealogical research. And my mother, initially it was like, oh, you're like 98% Ashkenazi Jewish. And then they got back to her and they were like, no, actually we like reran some stuff and you're just 100% Ashkenazi Jewish.
98, 100. Yeah. But that can be a really good sort of interesting, that's a really interesting sort of, if you've done all this genealogical research, I mean, that can be really fascinating, interesting way of validating that as well, or sort of figuring those things out.
Yeah. So it's a nice kind of confirmation of your research. And so that's fun. But, I would say, that side of the family is mostly, although not exclusively German. And, it's not like we sit around and do any particularly German familial things.
My cousin is really into genealogy and has traced all this. And I'm sort of like, yes, he could totally do this. But for me, I just feel like, and, my mother's American, but I'm from Finland. And like, sure, I have genetic matter that has come from Europe to America and then back to Europe through my mother. But I feel like I'm from Finland. Genetics just doesn't matter, like, in that context. This having been said, I did inherit genetically a bad back and knees and stuff. And, that's genetics too.
Right. Yeah. I inherited terrible ankles from my father's side of the family. So.
I mean, what can one say, right? But this is also nothing that would have impacted our ability to magically wield swords, for example, or magically sail ships or ride horses. So
right. Of course
maybe it would. Is there like a Ashkenazi Jewish super weapon that you're not telling me about that you could
banking? I mean I'm like, I can't think of anything that isn't just like an uncomfortable anti-Jewish stereotype.
Right. Magically know how to live in a city.
Right. Yeah. We magically know how to live in cities and manage money for other people.
Right. Absolutely.
It's my people. So we're now 15 years later, and the child has grown up into gratuitously shirtless Karl Urban.
And often half ass cheek, naked ass cheek, Karl Urban as well. And thighs, if you like thighs. But this is more of a chest.
You've got it all pretty much.
Really.
Yeah. But you've got a little bit. I mean, except for, male full frontal nudity, but other than that, you've got a little bit of everything.
Well, you don't have a lot of female nudity. I don't think you have any
that's
female
true.
nudity. I think you might see down to like halfway down our girl interests throat and her hands.
Right. Like collarbone and cleavage.
Although they do make out. They do have sex, and I think we might see her legs at that point.
I think we see like a silhouette, like it's far enough away that you don't get much of a view.
Right. Mm-hmm. So basically, this is a gratuitous semi-naked Karl Urban movie. If you were in this for Moon Bloodgood, no.
You do not see anywhere near as much of her as you see of Karl Urban. His tribe is about to embark on what I think is supposed to be some kind of trading trip, and the Pathfinder is going with them, which is surprising because he doesn't normally go on trips like this.
Well, there's also that like his successor died in an avalanche. So is he like going on this trip to meet other people so that the new Pathfinder can be designated? And you know who the Pathfinder is. You know, is this a shaman? Is this like a chieftain figure?
I found
a person who's really good at like figuring out where's north and south. I mean, given that it's all gray and we never really see the sun, I think knowing how to figure out north and south is important. But my assumption is that Native Americans would be able to figure this out even without some kind of designated Pathfinder, like, you know, moss on trees and all these kind of fun things. But so the Pathfinder, his successor is dead, which is important. And he's going on this trip.
My vague sense is, I don't know, I guess he finds paths in terms of like navigating, but also maybe finds paths in terms of helping people figure out what paths to take. But I think I may be meeting the movie more than halfway on that description.
Yeah, I think we're just supposed to be like, there's this dude, he's Pathfinder, he's old.
Yeah, he's a big deal. He's not the chieftain because another person is the chieftain, but he's like the next biggest deal.
Or possibly a bigger deal, but...
Right. A big deal in a different way? I don't know. He's a big deal. And meanwhile, we see that Karl Urban, who has been given the name Ghost, making him the only character in this movie with an actual name.
Which we can, I think it's safe to say that this is actually his name. He's called Ghost, and the only other person that's called like as if it was a name maybe is like the quiet one or silent one. That could be his name or it could be just a description.
Pretty much everybody else. I mean, Pathfinder, I feel like that's really a title, not a name.
And I think it's very clear that it's very clearly a title, and Ghost is very clearly not a title.
Every single other person in this movie, in the credits, they are named. In the movie, no one ever says their names.
This is not looking good for the If-Decker test, I'm saying.
It isn't, no. He stares creepily at a woman who, again, does not have a name. But we do know that she is Pathfinder's daughter. There is also a guy who's a warrior in the tribe who is clearly also interested in her. And he's kind of like glowering at Ghost and like refuses to shake his hand or something. I just call him alternate boyfriend because he, again, does not have a name.
And they very clearly do sort of a classic setup of girl love interest and then alternate boyfriend 1, hero, and alternate boyfriend 2, who may or may not die. I mean, this is the way all movies work. Either they end up like not dying or like acquiescing and being like, oh no, she's better off with you. Right. So now we know that this is going to happen and his chances of survival just plummeted by his glowering.
Yes.
And the sort of young men we learn are braves. That is their title, brave.
Yes.
And I feel there needs to be some kind of pompous music accompanying that, but I'm not musical.
Ghost, however, is not accepted as one of the warriors or braves of his tribe because he is still too haunted by the demons of his past, and that disqualifies him, I guess.
Despite being the shirtless one who's clearly most stripped of the whole cast, he is not, in fact, a brave. And but somehow he works himself into I don't know if it's a sweat lodge or if it's a tent where a Pathfinder's daughter is painting a red substance onto people's brows. So he's somehow like sitting in the circle, but nobody stops him before coming into the tent. There seems to be some kind of a ritual going on, and nobody's like, hey, dude, you're not a brave. You shouldn't be here. It's like
so you can't participate in the ritual, but
and it's like this isn't interrupted until she's literally gotten some of the. I'm thinking it's like red ochre or some kind of dirt, or paint made from earth being put on his brow, and I'm like, no, he's still haunted by demons of his past.
And he questions his identity. His mother tells him that he is born to the dragon men, but that he is ours. And I do love that he has maintained his English accent.
I mean, somebody has to. But there's some, I mean,
of course, it's an English accent, not a Norse accent or like Icelandic accent or whatever it would be.
Although when it comes to languages, it is sort of interesting. I mean, they're you can kind of tell who the good guys are. It's who is speaking a language that the audience can understand. And so it's the Native Americans who are speaking English, and in this case with this sort of British Commonwealth accent. And I always imagined he was from New Zealand because I saw him in Lord of the Rings, which was filmed in New Zealand. So my logic is faulty there. I know nothing about Karl Urban. That is sort of interesting that they're speaking like the audience language. And that's a really clear indicator that these are people that we need to sympathize with. Although we already knew that. We already knew that we needed sympathizers then with them.
He is indeed from New Zealand. I just confirmed.
So he has a Commonwealth accent.
Yes. The Vikings return.
Oh no, say it isn't so.
They love some child slaughter.
It's
their favorite hobby is just slaughtering children.
I mean, but because there's no monks in North America. Otherwise, children would be much safer because they just go slaughter monks. I mean, isn't this what the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and all these European texts are always saying about Vikings? They're slaughtering people left, right, and center. Obviously, there's no Christian monks in North America, so they have to slaughter children. I mean, what can you say? Genetic determinism as created by, I don't know, Christian chroniclers.
Stab first, ask questions later.
Exactly. I mean, maybe the Vikings think that they are. I mean, I'm superimposing on a script assumptions about European texts on Vikings, which of course doesn't make any sense because that's not I don't know what the narrative is for this movie, actually, like from that perspective. Okay.
There are clearly a collection of stereotypes about Vikings that I doubt are coming directly from having read those texts, but that are probably indirectly influenced at some point by those texts.
And if not by those texts, then by people who read texts about those texts in the 1800s who basically the same collection of narratives. That's the reason that about 75% of students take courses called Vikings, exclamation mark.
Yes. And of course, speaking of collection of stereotypes about Vikings, I love that not only are the Vikings wearing horned helmets, even their horses have horned helmets.
I mean, everything has horns. Everything that's like not Native American has horns in this movie. And also, I think it's worth mentioning, you have the stereotypical sort of Viking horn helmets, which are the horns are pointing up. But in this movie, they're sort of curved down, sort of, which is, except the horses' helmets. The horses' sort of nose horn helmets things, they're pointing up, but the actual people's horns are like curved down, and they're sort of like, they're special.
It's like, I mean, okay, it's different. It's still wrong, but it's different.
Exactly.
We kill a lot of people. We have some dogs eating some corpses.
That's always a good one. And we sort of introduced also to this sort of like the Return of the Vikings. You have this girl, Pathfinder, and this girl. I mean, by girl, I mean not the girl, but a girl, unnamed teenager, a child. They're out, and they seem to not be together, although we don't discover that until later. And then this girl comes across the kind of sudden movement, jump scare movement, dude with really horrible helmet and bad hair and bad teeth and skin. I mean, like the amount of black makeup these people put on. Like, I am dirty black makeup.
Yeah, it's one of the things you see a lot of in movies set in the Middle Ages is that not only do you have this grayscale filter, you also have people who just like put dirt on their face. Like it's that they're just clearly trying to create the impression that people in the Middle Ages just walked around just literally encrusted in filth visibly constantly.
Totally.
His mother is dead because of course she is.
Of course, because they come upon this girl and then they attack the village, and of course they kill the mother.
What are mothers for? Unnamed mother. The village elder or the chieftain, I'm not sure exactly who he is also captured. And he's the one who is at least given the opportunity to engage in combat with them, but of course he doesn't know how to use a sword, so that doesn't go so well.
And it's also interesting, everyone else is killed, and then it sort of seems as it playing on this like, oh, we are cruel, horrible, dudes, and so now that we've killed everyone and nobody else, now we can have our fun, and now we're going to kind of watch somebody kind of slowly torture or kill this dude with a sword, whom he obviously doesn't know how to use.
Right, but they do claim that it is an act of honor that they are giving him death by the blade and the opportunity to technically defend himself, which I don't feel like makes a lot of sense in this context, but I guess kind of sets up something toward the end.
Yes.
Ghost arrives. Immediately, they, of course, comment on the fact that he looks different. And also, fortunately for him, he genetically immediately knows how to use a sword. He knows how to use a shield. Yes, and ride a horse.
I mean, this is amazing. Later, we sort of get this vibe. I mean, we got this vibe when he was told, like, oh, you can't be a brave. That he takes the sword, this, the sword that came from the ship, and he's like swinging it around, looking like he knows what he does. So maybe he's been like practicing it in some glade someplace. I mean, in a world before YouTube, you could just like take this tool and kind of become this magic guru. No, this is definitely a genetic. You are a Viking, and therefore you magically know how to use a sword and shield and ride a horse.
Yes, because there's zero explanation in the movie for the shield or the horse. The sword, he at least had a sword, but there's nothing that leads us to think that he was, consistently trying to practice with or use the sword based on vague memories he had of other people doing so or anything.
No.
So yes, it makes no sense that him and only him can perfectly wield all of these specifically Viking weapons.
Absolutely. And it's either genetics or it's magic. But later in the movie, we discover it's like the genetic aspect.
Genetics. I should start a big.
I mean, just totally.
So he is able to mess up one of them in combat. He cuts up his eye, basically. He also snowboards away on his shield to escape.
That is a moment of beauty. I can accept someone raised in a cold climate with mountains, kind of knowing how to quote unquote snowboard. Where exactly these mountains are on the eastern seaboard is a little bit of a mystery.
I don't know.
But...
And also, of course, it's one of these classic scenes that you have in this sort of movie where he snowboards off a mountain into a lake, and it's you would be dead.
Mm-hmm.
You would have broken every bone in your body when you hit the water.
And then die of hypothermia.
Yeah.
Although seasons are a little bit weird in this movie. You can be in winter and then suddenly it'll be all muddy and rainy and drippy. And so maybe that was why he could survive is it was winter in the mountains, but I don't know, spring or fall or something in the lake. I don't know. But,
yeah, the seasons change every 2 miles basically in this movie, it seems.
Yep. Yes, they certainly do seem to. But as long as it's gray, right?
Seasons and hypothermia are, I think, modern inventions, according to this
one. That makes so much more sense. Of course. Silly me.
The Vikings are very grumpy about this turn of events. They do sew up the guy's eye. Wait, okay, they sew up the guy's eye, but then doesn't he, after that, just murder him for fun because he's mad that he screwed up? Or does he murder somebody else?
I think it's there's this other guy who's a little bit hesitant about sewing up the eye, and then the goon, not the chieftain, is just do it, but then he kind of jabs him or something, and then he just murders him. You see this very thick yarn. It's not even thread, needle and thread. It's like a darning needle and a yarn hanging from his face. And then he kind of sews it up himself. But on the other hand, manly men know how to do needlepoint and sew. So maybe he can manly man sew his own face up, right?
There you go. They are not speaking English. They are, what language are they actually speaking? I know they're supposed to be speaking
everything
Norse,
I saw on this was that they're speaking Icelandic. And there's definitely moments that I'm yes, that is Icelandic. And they actually even call the Native Americans with the term skreling from the Vinland Sagas. But then there's other moments when I'm that sounds really German. And with sentence structures, I'm that doesn't sound like Icelandic to me. Either they tried to kind of general, it could be just that the different actors have different accents because they have different linguistic skills. It could be a case of, you see this in a variety of movies, for example, The 13th Warrior, where you have actual Nordic actors and they're just speaking their own languages, which is actually pretty reasonable to think that people would have spoken their own dialects if they're mutually intelligible. I certainly can have a conversation with somebody from Norway and Denmark and so forth, speaking our own languages. It's increasingly hard because it's just easy to slip into English. So it could be that you have actors from various Germanic speaking places. It could be just accents. There's a variety of things that could be going on there, but they're speaking, let's say, Icelandic. I think that overwhelmingly it is Icelandic, but then there's moments of better or worse grammar / pronunciation, especially pronunciation, which is fine. I have no judgment. I tell my students, as long as we know who you're talking about, don't worry about pronouncing those names.
And I will say, I just looked this up to confirm. The actor who plays Gunnar is from Urbana, Ohio.
Yay, Ohio.
So I would not assume that he knows any of these languages necessarily, or at least I certainly would have no reason, based on anything I'm seeing about his background, to think that he is a native speaker, certainly, of any of them. So I would assume that he at least is an American trying his level best with something that's given to him as phonetic pronunciation that honestly you kind of wonder who did this. Did they have Google Translate in 2007?
I mean, it's a ridiculous budget considering the overall movie and its quality. It has a ridiculous budget.
Hopefully they hired a proper
So hopefully
translator
they have
at
a
least.
translator and maybe an accent coach. And I feel like Vinland did not have like the worst sort of vaguely Icelandic Germanic accent. Some of the henchmen were like, they're the ones, and I'm like, wait, that sounds like German. Anyway, I am not a linguist. This is not my forte. This is not my expertise. They're clearly not speaking English. It is something.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And sorry, I was just putting you on the spot in part because I don't know any of these languages because I study the Western Mediterranean and all of my research languages are Romance or Semitic languages.
And my research languages are Romance. I mean, some Germanic, yes.
And also Romance, yeah. But you have much more of a background in Germanic and
I'm a native speaker of modern Swedish. Yay me.
Yes.
Yes. And some others as well, but yeah.
Yeah. Is Swedish considered a Germanic language?
Yes.
I realize I don't actually
Swedish,
know.
Danish, Norwegian, Icelandic are all Germanic languages. Then Finnish, which I'm also a native speaker of, is a Finno-Ugric language and like not related to, it's like a secret superpower. It's like such an alien language compared to Germanic languages. But, Estonian, people will be like, oh, but you must understand Hungarian. And I'm like, you realize that like Italian and English are closer related than Hungarian. I mean, I literally... a good friend who's Hungarian and, being over there and like she's talking to her kids, I can only from context tell what they're talking about. Otherwise, I have no clue what these people are saying. So how languages, I mean, most people just don't know how languages actually work, which is fine.
Right.
But Finnish is definitely like out there.
My family several generations back were Hungarian speakers.
Oh, cool. Hungarian is such an interesting and neat language.
Yeah. On one side of my mom's family, that's the last place that they were before coming to the United States.
Do you feel like you should just be genetically predisposed to just be able to magically cook any kind of bell pepper or peppered goulash, just like without any recipe, just magically know how to do it? And Hungarian, of course,
and speak Hungarian.
Absolutely. I mean, if your life was written by the same people who scripted this movie,
I would just pop into Budapest and all of a sudden I'd be fluently speaking Hungarian and cooking goulash in a week. I could probably cook some goulash with a recipe, but
according to whoever wrote the script, you would just magically know it, genetically know it. There would be no recipes, I mean,
the goulash is in my blood.
Exactly. Ghost has no like sword manuals either.
True. Ghost goes and manages to reach, and I guess it's another tribe, but that's also where the survivors from his own tribe, which include Pathfinder and his daughter and like a couple of these other warriors. Yes, right. Yes, the people who were in this trading party weren't in the village when everybody got killed. And so they're now, with this in this other village. And so he joins them. They get him healed up and he tells them all of this like lore that he's learned about how the Vikings work, which he, I guess, remembers from when he's 12.
On the other hand, because he's basically saying that all they know is murder, all they know is slaughter. I mean, arguably that is the only thing he's seen, but he does sort of make it not just like, this is what they did. He's like, oh, and this is all they know. Like, this is like, so maybe it's from what he remembers as a child. It's certainly what everyone has seen so far. And he's very much like, you can't, the Braves are like, we're going to go and kill them all. And he's like, you cannot. And then he shows them the weapon and the sword. And this is the first time people seem to be like, have any interest in the sword.
And because he very much is like, somebody's holding up maybe like a spear that, has like a bone or something top, but that I guess must be made of wood. And he just reaches out with the sword and like slices the spear in half and is like, see, you're useless.
Right. And your weapons are useless. And I'm sitting there thinking, bows and arrows. Like, I don't know about you all learned about Native Americans when you were kids, but bows and arrows were like a really big thing. I do not know how many bows and arrows I forced my father to make based on about 50% Lucky Luke comics that had Native Americans and 50% Lord of the Rings. That's my childhood in a nutshell.
So it's like, okay, we're really going on this like weird, like guns, germs, and steel technological narrative. So that's a choice.
Guns, germs, and genetics.
Yes. And we also have this like weird scene where they're like in a cave and they're attacked by a bear. And he's like, see, I've got a sword. I can kill the bear.
Yeah, right. And because it's sort of a little bit unclear, like what's going on in this cave. Or is the trading party like resting there? Or is this just anyway? But there is this sort of moment that is sort of important later because he is like, oh, and I can kill the bear because I've got sword. And then that doesn't quite work because what ends up is Pathfinder. And Pathfinder is like old. He's like, whatever, old is in this context, that's what he is. He does this sort of like bowing down in front of the bear, and you're like, oh, his secret magic Pathfinder skills. And no, the bear attacks him and he lifts his spear, and then the bear impales himself on the spear. And this will be important later. The Pathfinder will appear to Ghost in a vision. No, not a vision, just as he's about to be drawn and quartered by the Vikings. If you are not strong enough to kill the bear, use the bear's strength to kill it.
Yes.
And so this is what Pathfinder does in the cave, is that he uses the bear's strength to kill it. He's like, he knows that when he's like, seems small and whatever, I don't know, breaks eye contact or something, that the bear's going to attack him. And then he just lifts his spear up and end of bear. Yay.
Right. The Vikings, meanwhile, are on the trail. And there's this hilarious bit where there's some snow with, I guess, Ghost's blood on it. And they like give the snow to the dog to sniff and lick so the dog will catch a scent. But then also Gunnar like eats the blood-covered snow. It's like, why? Why? What is happening?
If there's one thing you teach foreign exchange students in Finland is don't eat the yellow snow. I suppose nobody taught Gunnar don't eat the red snow.
He just missed that. He just loves blood so much.
Yes, he just loves blood. He's just gonna eat the blood. Yeah. Apparently maybe it makes him like better able to, I don't know, ingest. Maybe he's trying to ingest like Ghost's magic, knowing how to ride horses abilities. I don't know. But they're definitely on the trail.
Ghost then tries to go off on his own so that he alone can fight the Vikings, because only he, another white man with a sword, could possibly defeat them or even possibly survive.
Right, possibly. Because first he's like, no, and nobody can. And then he goes off in a different direction from the main group. The main group that their sort of leader is like, okay, we're going to follow Ghost's advice and we're just going to hoof it. We're just going to get the fuck out of here. And then Ghost goes in a different direction. And it's like unclear if that's like, oh, he's going to slay like another path. No, it turns out that he's going to set up to single-handedly kill the Vikings. Like only he, the white dude, can.
Yep. He is followed by one person. So this is the character referred to as Silent One, who is mute. Do you know the movie Harry and the Hendersons?
I do not.
It's this, I think, Sasquatch who joins up with a family. And then at some point they realize that, he's better off if they send him back to live in the woods instead of keeping him to live with some, like, I don't know, suburban Canadian family or whatever they are. I have not seen this in a very long time. And like do this like, go away, we don't want you anymore, to make him go into the woods for his own good. And that's basically what Ghost tries to do with Silent One / Jester, which is allegedly his name. But it does not work, and he still follows him. It is an unsuccessful Harry and the Hendersonsing of this man.
Right, and then we eventually will see them setting up like traps and things, and Silent One is clearly like helping out with this process. So despite not being a fully fledged character, as disabled people clearly cannot be, which is one of my pet peeves with this movie, he's still instrumental in helping build this like they booby trap a whole village in all kinds of super interesting ways, which becomes important, of course, later when we have the official standoff.
And I will note that although I would argue that nobody except for Ghost is actually meaningfully a character in the sense of having development or personality, maybe also Pathfinder.
The Pathfinder has a person. I think the girl also has moments of personality, but there's no real character development. Silent One is like my favorite character. So
I like that they're competent. Like they're characters that are very much not developed in as full a way as they should be, but both the Silent One and girl are competent at least, and I appreciate that. I will give credit where credit is due, such as it is.
Speaking of girl,
first he has a dream about Pathfinder, and it's this dramatic bit where Pathfinder tells him, the sword can cut both ways, and then he like falls on the sword and stabs himself, and then he wakes up in a panic, but then Pathfinder's daughter shows up. Yay.
And Pathfinder's daughter has followed her. Later we also discover that Pathfinder has followed them. It's a lot of people are sort of following. For somebody who's told people to go off and then he's gone to lead off the Vikings and set up booby traps, there's an awful lot of people who follow him for a variety of reasons.
Everybody has followed
everybody
him. Yes,
well,
pretty much.
Everyone who has a title, at least. Well, except the chief, the new chief doesn't.
Right, yes. But I think basically all of the people who are from his original tribe,
Yes.
basically. I mean, which does actually make sense in that, like, they're the people who, all of their families presumably were killed. I mean, alternate boyfriend presumably has, like, parents or siblings or something who are dead.
But is alternate boyfriend, is he from Ghost's tribe, or is it when these two tribes that kind of met? And my understanding was you had Pathfinder's tribe and his mom and his dad is the chieftain there. Then you have this other tribe where you have the girl, an alternate boyfriend, and Pathfinder. That they were actually not in the same, not tribe or family group within, that they actually are from different groups. And that's part of the sort of like alternate boyfriend is like, I have the hots for my chief, or for my path. I mean, it seems to Pathfinder is like maybe like the tribes, but then they travel in family groups.
Right.
Alternate boyfriend is in the same like family, like not family, like group. I feel like I should.
But he does seem like he knew Pathfinder's daughter already, right? I mean, him creepily staring at her is not the first time they've met. She knows him.
And I think it has to, I mean, that whole, like, these different kind of groups, I feel like I should run across the hallway and ask my colleague who works on Native American history and be like, so dude, how does this work? They're like a nation, like, I don't know.
Okay.
And then you have like different groups within them. And so they would have interacted with trade and known each other and like be familiar. And then it's one of those like, oh, and now we're going to kind of get together and meet up and do stuff like we always do. There's some kind of like a coming together ritualistically celebration. Children are like, oh, quiet one, yay, play with me. And then quiet one plays music. So he's clearly not deaf, but he is mute. And then there's that whole like staring daggers establishing rivalry thing. And then one group goes off and does something. So maybe it's like they were just passing and they're like, oh, like, let's go hang out with these people who are over here because we always do that. I think there is like, they do know each other, but they are from different groups. So I don't think it is the people who are originally from Ghost's group who follow him, except I think the silent one is from his group.
Right. Yeah. Anyway, so he and Pathfinder's daughter have sex. Silent one is, I guess, just like sitting in the corner awkwardly during this.
Probably having a cup of coffee off screen, wondering why he agreed to the job. Although, I do like his character. Much more interesting than Ghost, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
I totally ship the silent one and the girl, actually.
Yeah, okay. I mean, honestly, anybody but Ghost.
Well, I'm not sure about Gunnar either, really.
Well, no. No. And of course, and also, of course, I mean, the big problem is that really, like, she's the only woman, so all of them are essentially stuck being celibate unless they get with her because there are no other women left.
I mean, on the other hand, you have clear evidence Native American two-spirit, so, you don't have to always go for the girl.
True.
And Viking, which
Very
is basically pirate, there's a good solid evidence for non-Norse pirates and homosexuality sort of in the Caribbean and, the Chinese Sea and stuff. So, I don't know.
That's true. So certainly not celibate necessarily. Reproduction potentially an issue, but yes, but very good point that yes, they're not necessarily doomed to celibacy, just to perhaps dying out rather quickly.
Right. But this having been said, the Vikings are clearly not interested in settlement in this movie. They have no interest in women. They're considering how important for Vikings. And I mean, I believe that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that in most people's minds, Vikings engaged in slavery. And that certainly is the reputation that they have. But they have these Vikings have zero interest in any kind of enslavement, any kind. They are just interested in killing.
They just want to kill everybody. Right. And in particular, I noted that there's this big emphasis on specifically child murder, which struck me because I would think that, like, especially children who are kind of 10 and up, I feel like would be very desirable slaves.
Yeah.
Because they're just old enough that they can work, but also they probably don't really know how to fight. And so you don't have to like worry too much about them at the moment. You might think that they might be more tractable or hope that they could be at least.
Yeah, I'm best familiar with Norse slavery on the Russian rivers, and there is definitely the young women, particularly. Enslavement from western Russia and eastern Finland area continues into like the 1600s from Poland and that whole area, the Eastern Baltic. And young people I'm trying to remember what Jukka Korpela's book talks about, like the age is particularly interested in the Eastern trade route, slave route, which survives so much longer than in Western Europe. This is, of course, North American. There's no interest in any kind of enslavement. Or like, we don't see them, which is actually pretty good. There's not a whole lot of interest in rape.
Right. And I do appreciate that. Although, of course, there is with the, well, so there's not enough women to rape.
Well, that's true as well, because there's like the mom, and then there's like kids, and then there's like the girl, and there's sort of weird sexual stuff going on with the girl later.
Yeah.
But they're these, and they're not really interested in the pillaging. They're just interested in the genocide. They're just murder.
Right. It's just the genocide, but no enslavement whatsoever. And and of course, I mean, in the area that I look at, Mediterranean slavery was disproportionately enslavement of women who are valued as domestic servants, who are valued as well for their not consensual sexual and reproductive labor, as well as then if they were impregnated as wet nurses. And so there is this focus really on women as slaves. And I don't know if that's exactly the same in this context, but certainly like would be something to think about, but of course there aren't any women.
No, they're not. I mean, and the Norse also engaged in a lot of female slavery. Like, speaking of genetics, a huge portion of like this female genetic pattern in Iceland, for example, comes through Ireland. And those could have been, of course, I mean, the Vikings were pretty fluid when it comes to like who gets to be quote unquote a Viking. Like, in the United States, we're pretty fluid about who gets to be a plumber. So they could have been Irish who kind of joined the migration up to Iceland, but probably it's women who were imported to Iceland for either family connections. There's a lot of connections with Ireland. There's a lot of family connections. So it could have been like just intermarriage, but a lot of it was probably unconsensual, reproductive and sexual labor. This having been said, some of the most famous Icelandic women originated in what we would today think of as the British Islands. So anyway, regardless, Gunnar and his posse of dudes, there's not enough women for them to rape. Poor babies.
No.
Lucky women not to be there, though.
Right. So Ghost begins his one-man guerrilla war, or I guess, kind of two-man, I mean, because Silent One is helping.
Well, I feel it's like one-man war, and then you have like support crew.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you have both the Silent One and you have Girl, who are doing things like propping up sharpened stakes and then hiding. But they're not in the war. There's support crew.
He's really the only one in the war. He also at some point gets a hold of some Viking armor, which we'll talk about that later as well. But that he also inexplicably knows how to put on the full armor.
Of course he does. Magically. He magically knows how to do that. Like, totally. Genetics. Genetic ability to do buckles.
Yep.
And magically just knowing how to, totally.
I mean, actually, like I will say, like Jewish kids who are, doing things like around their bar and bat mitzvah time would be very surprised to learn that genetically you should know how to put on complicated items of clothing, because if you are observant Jewish, then during weekday prayer that you are supposed to wear tefillin. So it's essentially this like box with leather straps attached to it.
Right.
And there's one on your head and then there's one on your arm. The one on the arm is a pain to put on. So, really, I don't understand why my genetics didn't show me how to do it properly.
I mean, really, Sarah, how is that? Right. Are you sure the 20, however many in me was showing like Ashkenazi Jewish?
My mother's 100% Ashkenazi Jewish. Maybe it's because of the intermarriage, screwed up the.
I mean, right.
I lost the tefillin putting on gene.
I mean, you just magically didn't know how to do that. Like, obviously, because genetics tells you how to do this, because Ghost genetically just knows how to put on armor. Yeah.
Yep. We have some fighting. The other people show up, including alternate boyfriend. And he is the one who then he gets stabbed and then is like, you have to protect her for me. And it's like, come on. It's
that
like this
was
like symbolic, like,
right.
And it's just like this, like, okay, like, yeah, fine. You need to get like permission and like validation from this other dude to like, for your really, it's like, come on. I just hate this stuff so much.
And it becomes this one of the, it's not like about her choice. Like, I mean, she's out there, she follows this other dude. And so there's this moment where alternate boyfriend is like, oh, I'm going to go off. And then somebody else is like, you're just following her because she's following Ghost. And it's like, and then he shows up and it's just like, oh, you have to protect her. And it's this whole, like, as if she doesn't have agency, because she actually, she goes and she follows Ghost and she stays and helps, and she's, fighting these, she gets into these, I mean, mostly she's a support crew, but there is also some, fighting with
Fights
these,
a bit, yeah.
Which, she's not
and she's competent, which is, I appreciate.
Absolutely. And yet we have to have these guys be like, no, you get to, I mean, as if she doesn't have a choice in this. And it's just this typical, guy hits on you in a bar and you're like, oh no, I have a husband, because you saying, no, I don't want you is obviously not enough. So it's part of that whole toxic masculinity crap that's going on there.
Yeah, and at this point, it's like, she's already chosen Ghost. Like, this has nothing to do with you. You are completely irrelevant to this whole situation. Yeah. But okay, so yeah, but he needs to be like, you have to protect her from me. It's like, no, you're irrelevant and also about to be dead.
And there's this really sort of interesting moment there as well. Like, they've set up this whole pit, which is covered by like a loose lattice of kind of branches and stuff. And these braves who have decided to kind of abandon the trade unit and come and like kill all of them, which, you know, obviously alternate boyfriend only wants to do because, you know, # toxic masculinity. And then Ghost is trying to lure the Vikings over this pit so they'll fall on these sharpened stakes. And instead, the braves come out of the forest and run into the pit. And so they're actually, a lot of them are killed, or they're killed initially, an initial wave, by this trap set up by Ghost. And we see no guilt or remorse later. We just see this like, oh no, you're like killing. And it's like, oh no, are you killing yourselves in my trap? Or is it like, oh no, you're ruining my trap? I'm going to leave up that to, you know, the individual. But there's definitely sort of a moment of, if they had just showed up and say, hey, Ghost, we decided to come and like, oh, you're fighting them, let's all fight together. Instead, it's like these competing men, alternate boyfriend and his braves, and then Ghost and presumably Silent One, although he's completely marginalized. And this sort of like ways, and of course, again, it's like not the Native American and their fighting abilities and their sort of ability of, look, I don't know, knowing the trade and being like really good hunters that enables them to protect their people. No, it's white dude with his genetic ability to put on armor and like dig booby traps that kind of gets to save the day.
Right. And well, the booby traps, though, I do wonder if that's actually something that's coming out of things that he would have, you know, actually it would have made sense for him to learn growing up with this tribe. That would have been something that like the Native Americans also did and knew how to do. And so then it's this weird like, well, look, this is like ultimate white dude because this white dude knows all the white dude stuff, but is also like culturally appropriated the stuff from other people.
Right. Which, I mean, that would make sense that he would know that, because using traps. I'm sitting here thinking about the cave scene. Is there any kind of effort there when they're trying to capture the bear that would kind of indicate to us in any way that this is, because obviously building traps and things are, you know, Native Americans knew how to do this clearly. But if there's any kind of setting up for us, like, oh, this ability to learn, or is it all just like this magic genetic knowledge?
Right.
I don't know.
I certainly wouldn't say it's set up, but I think it makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh, right. And there's also this bit where they're in this other cave that has like a lot of like decorative skulls happening. You gotta love the like skulls as household decor and as handy weapons. I think Girl actually like hit somebody over the head with a skull at some point.
Or in the balls, but there's definitely hitting with skull, like imagine bowling ball and then smashing. That's when they're sort of being like, I forget if they're like licking her neck or some kind of other like really gross, overly sexualized
There's a lot of like near rape and or murder bits with her, like too many in one scene, I think. Right. Or what is effectively like one extended kind of battle sequence.
And I don't get a feeling it's like a sexual, I mean, of course, rape never is about sex. It's using power. But there's this sort of like, that it's not about power over her. It's like, oh, they're doing this to annoy Ghost because clearly she's like the love interest there.
Well, of course, that's what rape is about. Rape is about exerting power over other men.
Right. And so that is also, I think it's really important to note that this is really overtly, and maybe like in one way kind of like, you know, good for you for making this really obvious. Like, this is not about power over this girl, but this is about men, because that's what it so often is really about.
But it doesn't feel like the movie is necessarily commenting on that as opposed to, I mean, because it's also like, it never at any point does the film demonstrate any interest in acknowledging her trauma of having, you know, because it's obviously is being enacted on her body, even if it isn't about her, but it never ever engages with how she feels about any of this, because she's barely a character.
Right.
It's only about how Ghost feels about it, which is then just kind of like reifying this dynamic of like, yes, I mean, of course it's about men and only the men matter. So that's how it should be.
Right. But only if you are an able-bodied man. Because, right, I mean, this quiet one, he gets killed because obviously a disabled person cannot be a real, fully fleshed out or surviving character.
No.
And this genuinely upsets me.
Yeah, no, I agree. And also his death too is really about motivating Ghost as much as anything else.
And that's also the moment where we see maybe some of the best acting in the whole movie is when the Quiet One dies, and he problematically has a sort of like childlike, oh, I'm dying moment in sort of his friend's arms, which on the one hand, I don't know, I've never held an adult when, or any human being when they've died. Maybe that makes sense to have this sort of childlike, but for me, I also can't help wonder if there's sort of like, he is this mute, he plays with children, he doesn't speak, he communicates with this little flute thing. People who are disabled are often infantilized. And
Absolutely.
So in that moment, as I said, some of the best acting in the movie, which is the bar is not super high, but that's also his death is this sort of like, no, I mean, he's just not a fully fleshed character, of course, but that sort of like dispendability. And I mean, everyone, of course, except Ghost and Girl are expendable, but that sort of moment also makes me think about how disabled characters in movies and so forth often are these marginalized, if there's a group of people, the person who limps, the person who is disabled in some way, that, it's like in Star Trek having the red shirt or whatever. Like,
yeah, not entirely surprising, but very, very frustrating. So the Vikings capture a few people. They start to torture. Is this alternate boyfriend?
Yes, alternate boyfriend is hanging upside down, head in fire.
Pathfinder mercy kills him, essentially.
And I have to say, this is a really excellent opportunity that they missed. They could have done the Rite of the Blood Eagle. If they're going to be really historically, anachronistic, they could have done that. But instead, they do the upside down and fire trick.
That would have been visually interesting, at least.
Yeah, the visually interesting would have played into, Viking stereotypes and all this. But at the same time, fire, upside down and fire is also a perfectly acceptable way of really hitting home that these are horrible, violent people, which is their purpose in the movie.
They're violent, but they're very uncreative in this movie. I feel like the Vikings as portrayed in this film wouldn't have been smart enough to come up with the Blood Eagle.
That's also a very good point. That is a really good point. And also they have no purpose beyond violence.
No, they just want to hurt people. That's really it, because again, they don't even seem to want to settle. They just want to kill people.
Right. Yep. Killing for the sake of killing, like, I don't know, I drink tea for the sake of drinking tea, like, no purpose to it.
Yeah, as they do. Pathfinder and Ghost and Girl are also captured.
Pathfinder has shown up at this point.
Yes. Yes.
Out of the bushes.
Hello. He gets killed. He gets ripped apart. We got some good blood spray going into Ghost's face.
Drawn and quartered with all those horses that they have brought across. The Opie knows that these Viking horses, right? More about that later. And then, of course, you have nice, it's really bloody because, ripping people apart, always fun.
Absolutely. They begin to torture Girl. I think here there's also some creepy, they lick her arm and then go to cut her hand off. And it's like, why? Right. Why do we need to have you lick her arm? Why? Why are we doing this?
Serves no narrative purpose. I mean, they're trying to get somebody to lead them to the next village because, violence for the sake of violence. And I feel like licking somebody's arm, maybe there's it's sexual, and then Ghost would get really upset and be like, no, don't put your saliva enzymes on my girl. I'll tell you where the next village. I don't know if that's logic behind that, or if it's just like, oh, do something really like, hey, actor who plays Gunnar, do something really gross, and he's like, oh, liquor. Yeah. Which, frankly, is kind of gross.
Yeah, and I feel like there was supposed to be a sexual implication, but it's like, it's very gross, but it's also very PG.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Right. That's not really overtly sex, but it's also gross, and it kind of falls flat as a narrative strategy.
Between the licking and the fact that they are about to cut off her hand, this is sufficient, however, to get Ghost to agree that he will leave them to the next village. And he speaks Norse. Did you know that you could go 15 years without speaking a word of a language and suddenly be able to speak it perfectly fluently?
Wow, I'm just a defective person, because if I go 6 months without speaking a language, I can hardly figure out what I'm trying to say. Gee, yeah, no, totally. Wow, that's and he speaks it and it's there's no halting. If you think about movies where people are learning languages, like 13th Warrior or Dancing with Wolves, there's this process. He's just no, he's just speaks it fully and confidently.
Yep.
Oh, grant me the ability to remember languages like a topless Karl Urban in this movie.
Right. Yeah, I want to influence. Like, wow, I would be thrilled if, like, when I get to go back to Catalonia after all this is over, if my Catalan is that good.
Oh my gosh, yes, yes. I bet you can speak like, I don't know, Ashkenazi Hebrew or something magically, though, right?
Yeah, where is my genetic Hebrew? I worked hard on Hebrew. Why can't I just genetically speak Hebrew? Come on.
Your life was not scripted by whoever scripted this movie. Sorry, Sarah. Your life sucks to be you, really.
Which would have been helpful. You know, for languages, like, man, if I could just fluently speak every language that I had ancestors who had spoken that language, damn, that would be awesome.
Oh my gosh, this is the summer for me of reading like German and you know, everything from 15th century to modern German. And wow, I mean, my last name is von Weissenberg, and just because we pronounce it in Swedish, maybe I could just like magically know all the Germans that I need to read this summer. Oh, that would be great.
Yeah.
Life is unfair.
I know. Why doesn't it work that way?
Oh.
He begins the process of leading them. So this is where he, I think, actually like brings back Pathfinder's instructions, right, of using their strengths and their goals against them, essentially. And so he's essentially just trying to kind of take advantage of them, essentially of their kind of worst impulses in terms of their like impetuousness and their blind desire for genocide.
Which is also interesting because now they're like solidly in winter.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently people from Scandinavia 600 years before Columbus, which I think I did the math exactly how long.
And it's wrong. Yeah, it should be more like 500 years, but they said 600.
You know, fair enough. So that would be 892. Scandinavians apparently don't have a very good understanding of winter. And I mean, maybe if they're all from Denmark, but Iceland, Norway, which is most likely, or Greenland, you know, the people who, I'm actually pretty offended by this sort of like lack of understanding of climate.
You would think that they would know that sometimes ice is too thin to walk across. You would think they would know that.
You'd think they'd know that. You'd think you would know this. You would think that you would know this.
Mm-hmm. Yes. But they do not know this. So it's this whole episode where he's like, "Oh, we shouldn't cross the ice because you know, it's not strong enough." And then they're like, "No, you're dumb. We think it's fine," and like insist upon going across the lake so they can murder people sooner.
I suppose if there's one thing that you should be really careful, be like, okay, ice, maybe we should be careful. Like, there's no weak ice in Scandinavia is offensive. I'm just saying. I mean, this weak ice thing might be a more prominent trope in medieval Russian and Finnish legends. We have a lot of like ice and strong and weak ice things. It's not a big part of what we see in Scandinavian, Finland not being part of Scandinavia, so you don't see it as much in that. But this was certainly registered as something in, you know, just because it's not as big a part of legends.
Yeah, this doesn't mean that it's not something new.
Right. It's so. I
would assume that any place that has like major winter, the people who live there should know that. It's not that complicated.
It's not that complicated. And then somebody walks out on ice and is like, oh, this is maybe not a good idea. And then they're just like, no, we're going to go forward on horses.
Yeah. Anyway, so this doesn't go well. A bunch of people fall in, a bunch of people die. Ghost, Girl, and Gunnar obviously do make it.
Obviously, as you said, and I'm glad you informed me of this, you're obviously more up on your natural science than I am. Hypothermia is a modern invention.
Yeah. Because like Ghost is underwater for a really long time in freezing water.
I mean, having visions about Pathfinder and then coming up, and the ice is clear enough that you can see through it, which just another whole other story. And he's like banging on it, and he's exercising his muscles, and you're thinking, wow, that's an awful lot of oxygen you've got stored.
I feel like this is implying that both hypothermia and drowning are modern inventions.
Indeed they are.
They were supermen back then.
They were totally supermen. Oh, wow.
The great white past.
Or maybe it has something to do with, I was going to say, maybe it has something to do with like white men don't suffer from hypothermia and drowning, but you know, Girl is also, you know, exposed to the elements here. So.
Right. And some of the Vikings do drown.
That's true. Some of them do drown, but they're, you know, I was going to say unnamed side characters, but everyone's an unnamed side character. So.
Well, yeah, pretty much. They're unnamed, like, fifth string characters. So.
Right. right? They're like, Viking 1, Viking 2,
Right.
Viking 18.
Yeah, we're at the point where they don't even have names in the credits anymore.
right. So they can die, they can drown and have hypothermia and all that.
At some point, they have to go over a mountain range. They're kind of edging along a cliff. He suggested they tie themselves together for stability. They're immediately like, well, that's dumb. And then like somebody falls and dies. And then you're like, maybe we should tie ourselves together, for stability. So then they do that.
And of course, you have this moment when Ghost just like sees the party that died in the avalanche with, Pathfinder's successor. And he's like, oh, I have an idea. I'm going to lead them across the mountains.
Right.
And then we're going to rope ourselves together. Because people who are from, like, I don't know, Norway wouldn't have any clue about, like, mountains.
But yeah, and essentially what he's doing the whole thing is he's just kind of leading them around effectively randomly. At some point, he convinces them that the trail is real by at some point, picks up a doll that had been left and then throws it in the direction that he wants them to go in.
Yes.
That's basically what he's doing. So yeah, he takes over this mountain, but then despite his best efforts, they do eventually reach a village.
Well, they see a village in the distance. Because first they're like,
yes.
You are leading us in the wrong direction. You're not. And then he's like, behold, and you see smoke in the distance.
Right. So there's a village. I don't know if it's a village that they thought they were going to. It probably wasn't the closest one, but whatever. It is a village.
And I mean, the Vikings clearly don't care. They just want to kill everyone.
Yeah.
And this is a moment where Ghost needs a distraction. So he says to the girl in a language the Vikings don't understand, hit me, hit me, hit me. And this is also another favorite part because she's just like, first she's like, no, I can't. And then she's just like, okay. And she whacks him. And he's down.
Wails
and
on him.
She is kicking him. And I'm like, go, girl.
Good
right?
for you.
Good for you. And of course, this is then what happens. This sort of like the point that comes out of this is Chieftain Gunnar kind of rips them apart. And then they're like, what son of a Viking is going to let a woman hit him? Then he sort of like fake lets them goad him into punishing this weak woman who's clearly not weak. She's standing up for herself. And so he rips her coat open and goes to pull something from his belt like he's going to whip her. Well, it turns out that it's a sling. And then he uses a sling to flawlessly in the moment, which, if you practice, maybe, to throw a stone and hit the last Viking on this long string. And they've had unending, like ceaseless number of men, like unending manpower. But the last dude who's roped together, he whacks him in the face with this
and then
rock.
They just domino.
And then just domino down the mountainside and, manages to save girl. And then there's this whole like cliffhanger, people hanging off each other kind of thing going on there. And then you have the stand down between Gunnar and Ghost.
Gunnar goes, you chose savages over your own kind. And you're just like, I know who I really am.
Which he then yells in English, a language that Gunnar doesn't understand. I know who I am. And
this, of course, causes a plot avalanche.
A plot avalanche, yes, absolutely. An identity avalanche, I believe is the words that you used when we were watching this. Avalanche comes down. He has proven to himself that he is, in fact, I don't know, Native American, maybe?
Gunnar is, he's like about to basically fall to his death. He knows that he's lost. He asks for the honor of dying by the sword and says that he should give it to him because I am the last of your kind in this cursed land. And then Ghost responds, you're not my kind, and then just like lets him fall to his death, not to giving him the honor. And it is, again, it's this very muddled message overall over the course of this film that on the one hand, it's very much about like identity is about how you're raised and like he's able to like make this choice that these are his people because this is who he's grown up with, this is who he sees as his family. On the other hand, there is this weird genetic determinism that he has all of these skills that he has just inherited via his Viking blood.
Right. Nature versus nurture. There's definitely stuff going on here. But now we have gotten rid of all the Vikings. They're all dead. Yay.
Woo! Ghost and girl get to the village. We're told that the spirit of the prophecy has come full circle, and I'm like, wait, so is it just like, is the white dude the prophecy? Is like he the prophetic being who's going to change things? Instead of it's not the horse, it's this dude, it's this white dude.
And so to remind ourselves of the prophecy, there's this prophecy that they see this thing that is fleet of foot and white as snow, and when they see it, with this comes great change. And the great change could be all this stuff with Ghost being, or it could also be that he gives the symbol of the Pathfinder to a girl.
Which, I'm sorry, what authority does he have to do this?
That's who knows.
It's not even like Pathfinder gave it to him, endowing him with the authority as his successor.
No, he
really.
does. He does.
He does?
He gives it to him when they're like in the water in this vision or something, and he's like gives it to him, and he's like, who do I give it to? And it's something like, well, you will know. So he is kind of given this mystic authority to know.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
Genetics.
Anyway, genetics. But yeah, anyway, so he gives it to girl, which is nice. I'm glad that she has a title now, even if she still doesn't have a name.
Right.
And anyway, yes, and so I am going to argue that because she never, in fact, is given a name at any point in the film, this movie does not, in fact, pass the If-Decker test.
You know, it doesn't pass the If-Decker test. However, it is interesting, and I find it gratifying that she has a little bit more agency than I expected in the beginning. And especially, you know, she fights and she leaves to follow Ghost on her own initiative, although it is a romantic following as opposed to I want to go and gouge out their eyes following. And then, you know, she does smack him upside the head. We don't actually know what Pathfinder does. In the end, she says that now she leads the people of the dawn. So is this like a chieftain, shaman, or some I don't know. But she has a title, even if she does not have a name. She has
a title and a job.
And, you know, and she also clearly in the end has children. So sexual fulfillment, I don't know, that's assuming a lot.
I hope.
Yeah, exactly. We live in hope again.
I mean, she's having sex. I'm not sure I'm going to make a statement about how fulfilling it is.
Yes, although we are supposed to understand, assumingly, that it's awesome because shirtless Karl Urban.
Yeah.
I don't know. Now, I would agree that, I think we could make arguments to challenge the If-Decker test in this, but fundamentally I agree with you that she is not a named character, even if she survives. And having a title and a job does not make up for that.
And, you know, and the reason I have this is in part because I feel like the omission of names for women, although, you know, to be fair, in this movie, everybody except for Ghost has their name omitted.
Which is possibly a better argument for her passing the If-Decker test is because, very few people has names. However, I don't think it's quite convincing enough.
And I do think that in general, the absence of names for women, even when they are major characters, is a sign that the filmmakers ultimately see these characters as fundamentally far less important than the male characters.
Yes, absolutely.
I do think that is significant, and so I'm going to stand by it, and also especially because she's even the only candidate. I mean, there are exactly 2 women in this entire movie, neither of whom have names and one of whom is dead.
Right.
So that's why I'm ultimately going to say that I think this movie should not get the benefit of the doubt, is because it really does not seem like a movie that is deeply invested in its female characters.
It is not.
So that's Pathfinder. And at this point, we can get into the Vera et Falso, where we talk about what they got right and what they got wrong.
It's either going to be an incredibly long section or an incredibly short section.
Well, I'm going to say they didn't get a 10 right. Nope. It wasn't a 10.
Nope, not a whole lot.
We've, of course, already got into our horned helmets, but let's talk about some other armor and weaponry issues. The Vikings are wearing like full plate armor.
Full plate armor. Yes, they are.
Yep. Yeah, that's not a thing.
It's not a thing.
Would have been the case.
Chainmail, leather, padded jackets, quilted jackets. I believe gambesson might be the term they used later in Central Europe. That's what
metal helmets, metal helmets.
Metal helmets.
Some people.
The center pieces of shields, weapons, of course. You know, Vikings were very into metal weapons. Armor. Plate armor? No. I mean, that's not anywhere. That doesn't come until way after.
Yeah, you wouldn't see that anywhere in the 9th, 10th century. According to the opening crawl, it would be the 9th century, the late 9th century, which is questionable, but we'll get into that in a moment. Yeah, nowhere in the late 9th century would that have been common. Like, at most, they might have, like, some metal plates sewn onto a kind of leather, like sewn onto leather, or they would have had chainmail, but not this, like, full plate armor, which also the horses have, I believe.
Yes, the horses also have armor, which have horns on them.
Oh, yes, they do. But actually, so let's talk about horses.
That's actually a really interesting part of this movie, because you listen to, so this movie is from 2007. The sort of Eurocentric scholarly consensus was, horses originated in the Americas, and then they die out and then they're reintroduced by Europeans. This is sort of like the idea. However, the Native American narrative is like, no, horses have had a continuous presence. Like there's oral tradition, there's various things. And in 2017, there's a doctoral dissertation by Yvette Running Horse Collin from University of Alaska Fairbanks that is like, okay, well, let's look at the evidence as it is and actually proves that there is a continuous horse presence in the Americas based on archaeological evidence, based on DNA analysis of archaeological evidence, various things. This movie, in the very beginning, when we see a horse that's running around without a saddle, based on Collin's research, one could say, yes, that actually is correct. But that's clearly not the narrative that the movie is putting forward. The movie is putting forward that sort of traditional Eurocentric, we introduced the horse to the Americas, and then when they found photo bones, they're like, oh, we reintroduced the horse. So that's a really interesting kind of phenomenon that you have about horses and how knowledge works and how knowledge production works and kind of what kind of stories we tell ourselves. And oh no, we can't actually look at the evidence because we have decided that we Europeans introduced the horse. So that's really interesting. So shout out to Yvette Running Horse Collin and her 2017 dissertation.
I actually want to shout out another dissertation, which is Christina Stelter's dissertation, which is a literature dissertation from 2014 at the University of Glasgow, excellently titled The Horse and the Norse, Reconstructing the Equine in Viking Iceland. Stelter's argument is in part about the fact that when you're actually thinking about horses, first of all, Vikings did not typically ride horses into battle. Horses were for transportation and they were pack animals. Based on her research and some other things that I came up, in fact, the most distinctive feature about their horses seems to be that they were bred for what's called an ambling gait.
Yes.
Which is essentially something that like makes them kind of comfortable to ride. And that also it seems to have some relationship, as far as I can tell, to the appearance of these horses, which tend to be relatively small and stocky, as opposed to what you see in this film, where because they are riding them into battle, and they're these like massive cavalry horses.
Yes, they are in fact continental European style cavalry horses. Is what they look like. I mean, I'm from the medieval perspective. The Norse horse would have been the closest living breed is the Icelandic horse, which is, it has 5 gaits. The most famous is the Tölt, which is this sort of really super smooth. It's actually really creepy. I mean, I have a lot of respect for horses. I suspect that horses are significantly smarter than I am, and riding them kind of terrifies me. But when you're on an Icelandic horse and they're kind of walking or running normally, or whatever, the trotting normally, and then they shift into the Tölt, it's sort of like, it's really kind of it's dissettling, because suddenly it goes to this sort of like from like a up down to this sort of like gliding, because there's no rhythm that your body can kind of adapt to, right? And you're like, okay.
But that seems to be the point, is that it's supposed to just be like really comfy.
Which is, it's just great if you're not as, terrified of falling as I clearly am. So that is a really interesting about this horse as well. I also think that the Norse brought horses to Iceland. I don't off the top of my head remember if we have that evidence from the Greenland settlements, but that would be my guess. But if they're settling in Americas, as our beginning blurb said, having
then
horses.
There would be horses.
I mean, there could be horses, but horses are not as vital for settling as others. And so, for example, the 13th century Vinland Sagas talk about cattle. They talk about milk, and they talk about Karlsefni, one of these characters. He has a bull, and Karlsefni's bull scares the natives away. But so we have that, but horses would not be, I feel like if you're settling, cattle would be more important than horses, but I'm not 100% sure about that. But
horses are like a couple of steps in, I think, is my sense.
That would be my gut feeling, but again, I mean, who knows? I mean, we don't know enough about the story, but they're the wrong kind of horses, carrying the wrong kind of armor, and so the whole
doing the wrong sorts of things.
Yes.
Yeah, because I was reading about in this dissertation as well, the transportation of horses, and there are actually special boats for horse transportation. I mean, not only for horse transportation, but if you're going to bring a horse, you don't want like your regular long ship, which has like which is kind of like curvy.
Yes.
You want something that has a part of the hull is flat, so like the horses can stand up straight.
Yes, you absolutely would like a different kind of, and the ships that we do see are clearly the traditional raiding expedition longships in this. They are not the Canada. They're not that sort of like transportation vessel.
Right. But, and this is a seafaring culture, and part of that means that they have a variety of different kinds of ships that have different kinds of uses. And so there is a difference between your like quick in and out raiding ship versus your cargo ship. And they do not have, or we do not see in the film, the like kind of like this like cargo ship. How do you pronounce it? The Nor?
Knarr would be the Swedish, but Knarr would be also one pronunciation depending on which Norse language you're using.
We're a bit messy on our horse situation.
We have nicely managed to critique Eurocentric narratives of horses, and we have nicely been able to name drop some recent scholarship as well.
And speaking of Eurocentric narratives, I also wanted to say one more word about weaponry. It is in fact the case that probably these people would not have been familiar with metal weaponry, as far as I can tell. But the idea of the Native Americans, yes. But the idea that there is this then obvious and complete technological superiority of the Vikings' metal weaponry over the Native Americans' weaponry doesn't really make sense. And this is especially true when you take into account their weapons are made largely of things like bone and stone. It's not like you can just slice through them.
No, absolutely. And there's a very much of a sort of this narrative of like Viking weapons and superior steel, and people completely ignore that. Yes, the most prized weapons that the Vikings used were actually not necessarily domestic, like swords.
Yeah.
That would have been, there's these Frankish swords that are very important, the
right, that there's swords, and actually famous. Like the chainmail and stuff as well, right, were tended to be Frankish imports, I believe.
Yeah, and yes, they had iron ore in the lakes and all this, and that's great, but like this sort of technological somehow superiority of the Norse. Yes, actually their ships are technologically like really, are they superior? I don't know. They are really well suited for what they do, and other people in Europe didn't do what the Vikings did with their ships.
Right.
And
which
so,
is about, priorities at least, right? Like they created a piece of technology that nobody else had because it suited their needs.
And so there's a little bit of apples to oranges. But when it comes to weapons, this idea that they have these swords and that's somehow magically awesome versus Native Americans who are on their home terrain, who hunt with bow and arrows, which of course Scandinavians probably did too, but that's not as you don't see that a lot in sagas. Of course, sagas are stories about like ancestors written hundreds of years later, but we don't have a lot of evidence for bows and arrows in the way that we have for axes and swords. This sort of obsession with the kind of the weaponry in the movie, it's not verbalized, but it's clearly part of this like, oh, we've never seen a sword and that kind of ideas. It speaks to these sort of narratives that I think of fan fiction of Vikings more than actual knowledge about the Norse or about the Native Americans, more importantly.
Yeah, and this is something that's interesting, is that this technological superiority narrative comes up again and again in a variety of different specific contexts. That comes up in Columbus, and in terms of Columbus, it comes up even in later contexts. They're talking about guns. I came across some things that were interesting about that. They were basically like, well, first of all, guns weren't even that helpful because because often they were like kind of fighting when they were fighting Native Americans. The Native Americans were often like in woods that they knew better, and like, okay, that's nice that you have a gun, but you can't shoot them if you don't know where they are.
And stop to reload. And yeah, no, that's I think that there's this sort of like we are enamored by our guns, and we're enamored what we can do, and it makes us, because we know what guns can do, the damage, we feel safer with them. And I think that there's a lot of parallels to this sort of, a gun, the fetish that we have with guns, which, is not unique to modern America and, I don't know, the white power movement, but like there's definitely a sort of obsession with that. It's not until later that guns become such a superior weapon, but those first contacts, the first however many generations, I don't know, it just seems like it ignores diseases. Also, these Vikings apparently do not bring diseases to North America, which is
count our
blessings, right? But I do feel that it's really that narrative in the movies picks up on. Movies always reflect our own time period. They don't reflect at all the time period they're trying to depict. And that sort of obsession with technological superiority is clearly a really important part of it. Are we going to talk about the morning stars?
Yeah, and then of course there are the morning stars, which I believe from what I was reading, the earliest we have them is 14th century.
I was somehow under the impression that they were just like a fictive weapon, that they actually never existed. But I did not look that up, so I'm going to trust you on that.
I was doing some research. I'll be honest, I was doing some relatively cursory research on the morning stars. So what I found said 14th century, but what I found is not necessarily the most reputable. So maybe they're even later. We'll say 14th century at the absolute earliest.
Clearly not a 9th to,
yes,
I don't know, depending on when we consider the Viking Age to end, but this is not a thing.
Yeah, I mean, so this movie takes place, it says the 9th century, the late 10th century would make more sense. Regardless, we do not at that point have morning stars.
Considering how often these Vikings are like riding in this gray landscape, backlit, wielding morning stars, you'd think that like every household had one.
You would think. What's a household without a morning star, really?
I mean, right. I didn't see a single one at your house, Sarah. I don't know.
And of course, again, technological superiority, right? Because they have these weapons centuries later.
Right. Oh my God. Maybe they invented it. Maybe this is like one of those things like the Europeans reintroduced the horse. Maybe Vikings had morning stars and then they were reinvented later by other people.
But yeah, and so and I will say also, I looked out of curiosity. I looked up the date of Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond, a book that is very much about these kind of technological superiority arguments, and it's an argument that I would say scholars now are very critical of. But I'm not even sure I'm not even sure all scholars were that critical of it in 2007, much less the people responsible for making this movie. And so that was very much something that was just kind of around, and that was very much something that people assumed. But it is, I think, really important to acknowledge the fact that these are very much Eurocentric narratives that increasingly are seen as like not really holding weight.
Much more sort of modern, more current research sort of credits much more the germs theories, like the actual people, the eradication of peoples, like you have these early narratives of people coming to North America, and they're like, oh, and there's like cooking fires all along the coast as far as your eye can see. And then the next generation of people who've really written records from Europe are like, and it's pristine, empty, virginal landscape for us for the taking.
Wonder how that happened.
Right, I wonder how that happened. And of course, germs. Think this idea like, oh, but Europeans hadn't come that far inland.
Right.
Yes, because these Native Americans didn't in any way communicate with each other and transmit diseases that they had contracted. Like, how fast do you think disease spreads? When we have this global pandemic, how fast did we think that this disease spread? Even outside airplanes and stuff. And so that is a much more current understanding than technological superiority.
And on technology as well, I will also note that insofar as weapons did seem useful, they were actually adopted really quickly by local Native Americans, which then actually leads into the Historia Veritas, where I wanted to talk about a real historical event, person, or phenomenon, and in this case, about what is it that we know about Vikings in the Americas.
And there's actually a really interesting crossover to the technology. So what we do know, and there's sort of a chronology of understanding what we know about the Vikings in the Americas. Obviously, the first records that we have is the saga literature. The sagas, particularly the 12th century sagas, the Vinland Sagas, it's the Red Saga and Saga of the Greenlanders. And they do talk about technology. The Norse show up in Vinland, they're blown off course, and then they see this land and they show up and they have swords and they have axes. Particularly axes are sort of interesting, and the Native Americans are sort of fascinated by these weapons.
Right.
And there's these two kind of examples where you have, oh, this is a really great tool. We can hack things with it. And then somebody one of the Native Americans kills another, and they're like, well, shit. And they just throw it in, they just throw it away. This is a horrible weapon. We should not have anything to do with this because it's easy to kill with. And then the other one, this is my favorite. There's this axe, and they're like, oh, you can chop all these things, but then you bang it against stone and it chips. And they're like, well, that's
Huh.
useless. That's a useless
Huh.
thing. And they just get rid of it. And so that's one aspect of depicting the sort of the weapons and the Native Americans. And then the
Right.
other one is that the Native Americans are really interested in the weapons, but the Norse are like, I don't think so. This is a bad idea. Let's not sell this to them. And instead, their trade is not based on selling weapons, but on milk, which would indicate to me that they have dairy animals with them.
Right.
And so that's one of the narratives in the Vinland Sagas. And so the Vinland Sagas, I mean, saga literature is never evidence for Vikings. They're written much later. They're these writings about, our kind of glorious but problematically pagan ancestors originating from Iceland. And, they're amazing and everyone should read all the sagas because they're awesome. The Vinland Sagas are two and they're pretty short sagas. There's a great Penguin Classic edition. But this was sort of like, oh, Vinland, where is Vinland? Vinland, like named for like Vin for wine. In sagas, there's actually a German slave who's like finds grapes and it's just like grapes. And so there's a lot of like thought about, okay, where would the Norse have gotten? So in the 1800s, early 1900s, there's a lot of like, where would they have gone? Is this just a story? How would this have worked? So that would have been another sort of one source of this. The Greenland settlements were really well known. They traded walrus ivory, at least in the 14th century. And then when their economy is completely dependent on walrus ivory, and then that's displaced by African elephant ivory.
Right.
And then that sort of moves on.
Makes sense in terms of the timing, because based on what I was reading, that settlement, I think the last clear evidence of it is in the 15th century, or like around 1430, I think.
Yes, 1430. And then we also have like from the 16th century, the Pope is like, there's like Christians out there. Like, shouldn't we like look into what happened? Like, what happened?
What's that deal?
And so that's sort of going on. I mean, there's also other sort of like oral traditions. Like people are like, oh, there's Madoc, this Welsh prince who like magically goes over to Americas, but that's not the Vikings going to Americas. Whalers, monks, various things. But that's not really the Greenland settlement and sort of these other stories. I mean, Prince Madoc of Wales is completely fictional. But since like white dudes, especially not Germans, French, and English people, weren't sort of like take the Vinland Saga seriously or the Greenland settlement really, like, so obviously that doesn't count. And then of course there's the Vinland map, this amazing forgery that surfaces in 1957, and Yale University buys it for an undisclosed sum of money. It's obviously fake.
Do I want to know how much money that was?
I know, right? Well, Wikipedia I think was like 300,000. I'm like, maybe, I don't know, but it's obviously a fake, but it's very exciting for anti-Catholics in the 1960s who are super excited to be able to claim that white dudes discovered America before Italians, who of course were not white.
Were not at the time considered to be white, right?
But conveniently, Scandinavians, by the time this had happened, had become white in the 1800s. Hashtag racism misconstructions. And so
there's actually this really interesting history of these fraudulent archaeological discoveries so in Minnesota there's this stone with runic inscriptions found in Kensington, Minnesota, that at some point they're like, no, this, at some point people like realize like, yeah, actually no, this is a fake, but it is very much about like, let's focus on this like white Scandinavian past and try to bring it back further. And of course, what's interesting in Minnesota, because Minnesota, of course, much later has a lot of Scandinavian immigration.
Absolutely. And this whole, like, I mean, it has to do with this anti-Catholic, because of course, the Scandinavians are conveniently Protestant. By the time this is sort of a big deal, of course, the Vikings were not Protestant. Putting that out there. And sort of there's this huge like movement for Leif Erikson as like the discoverer of America. And people always forget Bjarne, who spotted America first, according to the Vinland Sagas, which, and there's a lot of like white supremacists who have embraced this. There's some really problematic use of this as sort of evidence for Scandinavian superiority, anti-Catholicism, the strong, pure Nordic race, which I always find really fascinating because the American founding fathers considered Scandinavians swarthy. And that's a great example of the construction of race and how Scandinavians were able to kind of own. There's a really interesting scholarship on of the Scandinavian community in Chicago during the World Fair, were able to kind of make themselves the ideal immigrants riding on the backs of these problematic racial theories and stuff.
It is really interesting, of course, as a part of American history, the ways in which different kinds of immigrant groups at different points are kind of incorporated into whiteness. Scandinavians, the Irish and Italians and Jews, although every now and then you see some like little like moments here and there where it's like, oh, does everybody actually still think that that we're white? Because I think that I'm probably white and I certainly benefit from white privilege. Then there's, Charlottesville where they're chanting the Jews will not replace us, and it's like,
right.
Oh, okay.
No, and it is really interesting. I mean, so Finland is not part of Scandinavia. We're part of the Nordic countries, but people certainly consider us super white. Yet, I mean, interesting contrast to like Nazi race ideology in which Finns are Mongoloid. And so there's really interesting sort of like who is considered white and when and by whom, and how much of it is in this interesting intermix of skin color / religion. And I think religion plays a really important part of this. And the example of the Jews is a really good one, right? Like of how that is kind of weirdly mixed in there. Or like people who make assumptions about work ethic based on racialized ideas and assumptions about how good or bad people are with money, or how in America, how American you can be. And I think about Mormons who were like considered like super un-American, and we had this massive, this is the antagonism between the Mormons and their polygamy. I mean, Mormonism is a really American religion. It's from upstate. It's
actually arguably the most American religion. But it actually is like a religion that is, founded in America and that is deeply rooted in American culture.
Yes, and totally like dependent on freedom of religion. I mean, it's the most kind of the most American modern religion, absolutely. And this and yet this sort of like anti-polygamy, which they've justified theologically and so forth, is what makes the interpretation of the Constitution, especially when it comes to the domestic private sphere, a mainstream Protestant document. This is a really important part of like how people are considered whatever. And so the embracing of Leif Erikson as the discoverer of America as a way to displace the Italian Columbus. And of course, I'm sitting there thinking, he's from Genoa, like Italy. Like, wait, what? Like,
right. And Italy is, of course, not a thing, right?
No, it's not a thing. It's 15th century. Like, this is just not a thing.
And he's also like some guy from Genoa who then is like paid and like, by the standard,
There's a lot of interesting things. But this whole sort of like whether the Vinland Sagas actually represent actual Vikings in North America, or the Greenland settlements, did that like enable them to come here, or the Vinland map really becomes moot because in 1960 there's a discovery of Landsø in Newfoundland, a actual Norse. Well, we often say it's a settlement if it was a settlement of an overwintering location, so like a semi-permanent base, or sort of a transient when you're out doing your walrus hunting or whatever. That's sort of something that one can discuss. But this becomes a National Historic Site of Canada in 1968. 7 buildings, carbon dated to about the year 1000. As somebody who's interested in textiles, there's like weights, which are stone weights, which are probably from a loom, household items. I'm not sure about horses or bulls, bull, but there is really unrefutable evidence for a Scandinavian presence around the year 1000 in North America. How farther inland, how permanent they were, that's kind of up for, hopefully we find more evidence, more scholarship will come out of this, but nobody can be like, the Norse didn't come. So on one hand, it proves all the Leif Erikson, like rah-rah Scandinavian presence in America, right? But I think it's a good example of what we do with this information is so valuable. Like, am I going to use this to kind of try to lord it over other people and to emphasize my own group? That is a problematic aspect versus if I'm like, oh, and scholarship shows that there was like Norse here and there was like warp-weighted loom weights, which I'm fine.
Right. The other thing that's interesting is that I believe in that area was also, there is a group that was based there called the Thule. I'm apologies if I am not pronouncing that correctly.
The Thule Inuit population.
Yes, they're like, they're described in something I was reading, they were described as kind of like proto-Inuit or something like that. Okay.
Yes, the Thule people.
The Thule, it's clear that like they had iron artifacts that date around 1000. And so they are at least learned something about technology surrounding iron and are using that. And also they have,
some of the iron that we have from sort of the Thule population. And then later, some of it seems to be from Scandinavian origin. And some of it, I believe, and I could be wrong, I was talking to a colleague I mean, Native Americans certainly had the technology to use copper, bronze, like
yes, absolutely.
use other metals, and there is iron that exists here. So
yeah, but so they have iron, and they found carvings that are associated with the tulip that resemble Norse chess pieces.
yes, and that is also really interesting and really awesome, especially because we have such good evidence of Norse chess pieces. The Lewis chessmen, for example, are the most famous examples, with these stereotypical conical helmets with a nose guard, no horns pointing down.
No horns,
or
shockingly.
or anywhere.
Shockingly.
Shocking, I know. So there's clearly interaction and evidence of that. And you have the Norse sagas and also sort of oral traditions of interactions with natives in both Greenland and, of course, North America. But again, sagas, not always direct evidence.
Although that is, I think, just one other thing that I think is interesting and valuable to mention is the fact that there is this evidence of both hostilities, but also more positive or at least neutral interactions, which is, of course, not what you see in this film. And I do also think that it is really valuable, first of all, to make the note of the fact that the Columbus model was not necessarily perhaps the only model for quite how things could have gone, but also that the white supremacist narratives that tend to make use of the Vikings, I think one really interesting counterpoint to that is the fact that if you actually look at the history of Viking travel, it actually demonstrates some amount of openness to engaging with people of different cultures and even perhaps, adapting or learning from them.
The Vikings, or the Norse, of which, of course, Vikings, it's an occupation, pirate. They're really excited by things that are different and exotic. Everything from, we've known this from a variety of sources, like within one or two generations when the Norse settle someplace, they're not naming their children Norse names. They're not speaking, we don't have evidence of them speaking the language. They are really owning these other cultures. We have DNA analysis from Viking graves, which, first of all, some of these famous like Viking hordes in England, it's not just men, it's like women and children and like the whole shebang. But also this idea of some kind of ethnic purity. You have people who were buried as Vikings who are from a variety of places, not just Denmark, Norway, Sweden. You have people from Frisia, and you have people participating in this quote unquote lifestyle who are like from Ireland and from various places. And even one of the most famous Viking warrior burials, turns out the person buried there has female chromosomes. What that means, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a female warrior who presents as female, but might have. Who knows? Just because your chromosomes are female doesn't mean you have secondary female sex characteristics and stuff. Right. But it could have been.
Indicate some amount of gender fluidity.
It could absolutely indicate. And from everything that we know, overwhelmingly, the Vikings are really into, we might call it cultural appropriation, or adapting and assimilating and really getting into that joyous, almost sometimes when you think about playful diversity. You have archaeological evidence. You have a Buddha statue from 9th, 10th century in Birka in Sweden. You have this very typical Irish bowl that's found in Scandinavia, and it has a runic text in a Turkic language that says something like, drink well and have lots of sex. And it's a society that is so into the different and into exotic. And trade is, we think about, Vikings, like raiding. Trade is such a vitally important part of this world.
Right. And that means that they have a lot of connections with a lot of people, which are not all entirely hostile. I think that is really interesting in terms of, when we're talking about trying to dispel white supremacist mythologies, that part of that is talking about actually the Vikings are, if you actually want to learn something from the Vikings and take the Vikings as your model, well, the Vikings are arguably, sort of icons of some sort of multiculturalism.
Absolutely. From food, walnuts. Professor of ours at graduate school was very into this sort of exotic, the exoticism of the walnut, the importing wine, glasses, all these various things.
Yeah.
And I really think that I had students talking about this, how multicultural, and sort of really in their own conversations being like, wow, white supremacists are really clueless. They have no idea of history. And I was like, my work here is done. Everyone earns A's. Not really. I have some kind of professional integrity after all. But I do think that is, if there's one thing we should learn about the Norse, is their adaptability, their cultural adaptability, their economic adaptability, their embrace of diversity.
Absolutely.
And that they did not have horns on their helmets.
If you remember nothing else, remember that neither they nor their horses had horned helmets.
Diversity and no horns. That's, I think, a really good place to be in life, really.
Absolutely.
Also, they weren't dirty. I mean, this
Right.
is one of the things that we know about the Norse. There's this whole complaint about in England, like, oh no, like our women are going after these like Northmen because they're like,
they bathe too much.
Because they bathe too much and they're cutting their hair, and it's all like the way that the Norse thought of themselves from art and so forth is like they've got short hair, longer hair in the front but short in the back. Or as one of my students said, oh, you mean they had like business in the back and party in the front, like a reverse mullet? Europeans from south of the Baltic didn't wash apparently as much and had longer hair. Of course, then you have the 13th warrior where you have like people spitting in bath water and then others bathing in it. But I do think that sort of, I'm thinking how much effort this movie puts into having the Norse be dirty. It's interesting to be like, these people apparently bathed a lot more than you think.
Well, and in general, people in the Middle Ages tended to bathe a lot more than people tend to assume they did. But yeah, in particular, I think it is really interesting that they're so emphatic about them being just, filth encrusted when, there is this narrative that indicates that, in fact, no, they even bathed more than some of their contemporaries.
It's like the stereotypes of the horns, they're dirty, they have long hair, and for some reasons, out of the blue, tattoos have showed up also as a thing.
Which is also so fascinating because, of course, that's then one of the things that, like, white supremacists love them some Viking tattoos. I mean, we remember the QAnon shaman at the Capitol insurrection who had his Viking tattoos going.
Like, no. And then people are like, well, how do we know that they didn't have tattoos? It's like, no, we actually have enough evidence that we know this. Like, what do I know? I'm just a card-carrying historian.
We don't know anything. But they're the real experts.
Right.
Random dude who goes and gets a stupid tattoo. He's the real expert. So that we can go into the Fabula Nostra section where we come up with a piece of media inspired by this one.
I thought about this an awful lot. Like, I should have today been reading my German here, modern German, and I was instead like, what would I say? And I have three scenarios. So one, I'd say put some good subtitles on the original Norwegian film.
Oh.
Right? So this is a Norwegian film, Ofelas, from 1987, and the 2007 movie is loosely based on it. And it's about the Sami, the indigenous population of Norway, Sweden, Finland, and very northwestern Russia. The Sami are the good guys, and they encounter a much more believable bad guy than our horned helmet dudes of Pathfinder 2007. And Ofelas means Pathfinder. That's also in Sami, in one of the Sami languages. There's multiple Sami languages, which are often conflated, #Nordic white supremacy, right? They sort of have this sort of same situation. They want to find more people, and then a young boy is sort of like forced into pathfinding for them or guiding them, leads them up a mountain, there's an avalanche, all these things. The bad guys are likely Chuthit from Sami folklore, who some say are Norwegian, so that would be Christian Norwegians. Some say they're Norse or Vikings, but regardless, they're marauders from someplace between the Viking age and the 18th century. One can actually read about some of these stories about the Chuthit. So another plug, they've been recently translated in English by Tim Frandy, who's at Western Kentucky University, in his book Inari Sami Folklore Stories from Anad, which is published by University of Wisconsin Press. And it's a wonderful collection of Sami stories. So I would say my number one would be like good subtitles on this. So that would be great. And you can actually watch this on YouTube. And YouTube has there's a dubbed version, which is not super awesome, but there's also one that has the original Sami with subtitles into Norwegian, so you can practice your Norwegian, which I know you're dying to do. So that would be...
I can practice my non-existent Norwegian.
Exactly. But that would be my number one option, but that's not quite the Fabula Nostra version. My number two, take Ghost out completely. Just no Ghost.
Okay, great.
Instead, have nameless girls, and sure, she can be called Ghost. I'm okay with that. Maybe she can talk to the dead. I don't know, those Pathfinder, like talking to dead Pathfinder.
She could be named Starfire. She has a name. We could just use it.
We could just use it, absolutely. Or we could use something that will like foreshadow her later role or something. Maybe, I don't know, alternate boyfriend teases her about this. I don't know. There's no reason she has to know Norse. I feel like there's no moment in this movie where ghost has to know Norse, except for like the whole identity avalanche kind of things. Like,
yeah,
that's not, and you don't have to have that. We're not going to miss out on fabulous dialogue. Let's be honest here. I also want the quiet one to be her love interest.
Ooh,
I want the quiet one to be boyfriend number one, partially because, contrary to common movie narratives, disabilities do not reduce a person's ability to be fully fledged and interesting characters and people, right?
Or to have a romantic relationship, something that also is very, very rarely portrayed.
Very rarely portrayed. Or then it's like a problematically like the thing, right? Starburst and the quiet one, who's, maybe his name is Jester, I don't know. They can build traps and you can, they can use the weak ice story, but I think they should make it smarter, like telling the Vikings it's a field, and maybe having part of that sort of narrative being like finding a way to get to the lake so that the Vikings don't see the boats and the fishing nets, right?
Yeah.
And then going out there. And a delicious moment would be when the Vikings realize that they're not, in fact, on a field, but they're on ice that can carry a Native American woman, but not anyone in armor. And I think they should also have like historically more accurate armor, obviously. And I think they also should not have horses, but whatever.
They can have a couple of like Icelandic pony pack animals.
Exactly. I mean, this is all predicating that we want a Native American centered Viking interaction movie.
Right.
I'd be perfectly happy changing that narrative, but if we're going to go with that, I think this is how we should do this. Sure, this is going to copy Eisenstein's and the Russian Primary Chronicles narrative about Alexander Nevsky, who beats the Swedes or the Teutonic Order, depending on the version, who, they go on ice, and you have like the Russian light cavalry versus the heavy armored Catholics, because I like the idea of the weak ice, but I think it can be done smarter. And then she can lead them up the mountain, and everyone else can be taken by the avalanche, and that's same. She can save the quiet one. I think that's a great narrative. Save it like not in the way that Ghost does in this movie, some kind of a smarter way. They can stumble into the natives who fled, and she can still be made Pathfinder. And the quiet one can be the one playing with their kids and her voice, then telling that now she leads the people of the dawn. Maybe she could have, I was thinking like a name like, I don't know, Morning Bird or something that would like in the beginning kind of foreshadow the whole people of the dawn thing. Although I like the idea of having the name on the original, right? And so that's sort of like if we're actually going to use this movie as the jumping off point, if we're going to have like the basic premise, Native Americans versus Vikings in some kind of a antagonistic relationship. I would like historical accuracy with clothing and stuff like that.
It's always nice.
And then there's the movie that I actually want, which would be First Native band shows up on the shore, and then there's suddenly a bunch of dudes in ships, and then interactions based on the Vinland Sagas. Trade, lots of trade, curiosity about weapons, disgust that you can harm people, and then throwing these weapons in the sea, or the axe that chips on stone, right? Excitement over milk, because that seems to be what they're trading. One of the things they're trading, like, oh wow, you have this milk, and right? I think that's really cool. There's some interesting sort of interactions there. And maybe, yes, because there's the Vinland Sagas do talk about fighting, they talk about violence, maybe showing it from the perspective of the natives, like there's this unpredictability. They don't quite like, well, why won't you trade this thing with us? We want these, I don't know, knives. They're really good for scraping hides or whatever. Or you can get into an altercation instead of having this sort of, like, there's some really good bad guys in the Vikings, the Vinland Sagas that you could use. Ericsson's daughter, Freydis, is a great example. She's like a total bitch in the saga. There's some really interesting women in these sagas, but if we're telling it from the perspective of the Native Americans and if we were going to use a European narrative to center Native Americans, we could do this in a way that would be drawing on that material, using a lot of information that we would have about Native Americans in this time period, but having Freydis as a bad guy, because there's this altercation between the Native Americans who also, like, they clearly have superior weapons because they have bows and arrows. They're able to use this. And so then you have these Viking dudes who are like, no, this is like too scary. And then Freydis is like totally man shames them. She rips open her shirt and she's got her bare breasts, and she grabs a sword and she's like beating her bare breasts with her sword. And the Native Americans are like, what the fuck? And run away. And I think that would be a great, if you're going to use a European narrative about Native Americans, why not have this kind of she's a really good bad guy. And I think as a counterpoint, it would be really interesting to have a Pathfinder, Native American Pathfinder, who's female, who's a little bit older, not like a young chick necessarily, thinking about people could play her. Tantu Cardinal, she was my favorite in Dances with Wolves. Maybe Sachin Littlefinger, she declined Marlon Brando's Best Actor Oscar back in 73. Bedard, who was actually the Pocahontas speaking voice in the, what is it called, the Disney movie. These are sort of women who are now in their sort of their mature adult women. They could be great pathfinders, navigating this trade communication. And sure, if you want a love interest, Stellan Skarsgård could be a fantastic love interest from the Viking side, like a little bit of mature love. But if you wanted to have young, hot people without shirts,
then you can bring in some of his children.
You can bring some of his children, and you can have like the Pathfinder ladies' children. There's some amazing young Native American actresses out there that could totally do this. And I do think that we would have to have at least an example of Karl Sefni's raging bull attacking the Native Americans, because he's a bull and he freaks out.
So my idea was essentially something relatively similar, but that I actually think it would be really interesting to even have a film where there's perhaps some kind of internal focused plot line, right? Maybe something about like tribal leadership and how that system is maybe changing in its own ways in terms of, you know, or if there's issues and they're migrating or something, but like something that's internal, that's the main focus.
Right.
And then these people show up and that's like a side plot.
Oh, that would be fantastic.
That is just like, they're doing all of these things and then they like go and like trade and then they're like, this milk is really interesting. And then they go back to their lives.
Right. Or one could even be like, one could have some kind of intertribal thing, and to go to it the old fashioned, like, oh, you're these weird people out here, but you have these weapons. Like, let's join, let's ally.
Right. Or even like, let's just get some weapons.
Right. Let's get some weapons. There's something very gratifying of this idea of the Europeans being like a complete side, like just like a, like, you know, a 10-minute, oh, they're these people, and then just ignore
like I want them to like I want them to not have names and barely have speaking roles.
Oh, that would be really something, wouldn't it?
And like all of the named central characters are Native Americans. They'll all have actual names that are used at some point over the course of the movie. And and that there's just these like occasional just like side interactions with like this nearby Viking settlement.
And you could even go with the whole, the Viking settlement is like an overwintering place. There's Vikings there regularly. We know them. We're not antagonistic. We have these trade things with them, but we're not going to make a big deal.
Maybe like things have been going on for a while, and then it's like, oh, you know, it's winter. Those Norse guys are going to be like sticking around for a bit. Like we'll pop over for the afternoon.
Like, oh, we know we're traveling. Maybe somebody's wounded. We need shelter. Oh, you know, I know where we can get shelter. You know, maybe the Norse aren't even there, but their house is there. And we're just going to use it, which is they're not even unnamed. They're not even there.
So so I love that idea. Yes, that's what I really want to do, is like they're just like, maybe they're like, so they're like there, but like they don't matter. It's not even really about the interaction. They're just like this like marginal, occasional part of people's lives in this region. I think we can certainly both agree that like we want like the non-white savior narrative version of this in some form.
That is the big takeaway from the way we have constructed these, is that we want the non-white narrative. The non-white savior dude. Basically, we don't want ghosts. I don't even have a strong opinion about like the characters in these movies being, you know, conventionally hot and being shirtless or, you know, half butt cheek. That's fine. I just don't want. I just don't want a movie that's about like, actually we need a white man to save the Native Americans. Like that's really just what I don't want. That can lead into finally the estimatio, or rating of the film from 1 to 5, based on whatever purely subjective criteria we see fit. Well, I assess this as a 2 because it is very satisfyingly bad. It is very bad, but it's very satisfying. I don't know why it's so satisfying. Maybe I sort of feel like I don't even need to feel at all bad about like trashing it, because clearly whoever made it didn't put any effort into it, or effort into the things that I think are important. But I love me a really good bad movie, and so this is definitely not just good bad for me, it is satisfyingly bad.
Yeah, and this was very fun to watch. I had a good time watching this with you in particular, and with Stephen aggressively trying to not watch with us.
He's very talented, yes.
But I think ultimately, I'm going to go down to a 1.5. I agree with the good bad designation, but I think that I'm going to err on the low side, just especially in recognition of like the ways in which this film has a number of, or kind of perpetuates a number of both white supremacist or like at least white centered and I would say to some extent misogynist narratives, as well as just like there are some movies where I watch and I'm like, okay, I feel like maybe they read a Wikipedia article and then got drunk, repeated the Wikipedia article to somebody else, and then that's the movie.
It's sort of sad that they take this 1987 Ofelas movie and kind of reproduce it crappily.
I think, yeah, this movie is like, I think they did that. I think they just watched that movie. I don't think anyone involved in this movie has ever read anything.
Very possible.
So I think I'm going to give it a 1.5, but I have other examples of movies that I have given a 1.5 to, but that doesn't actually mean don't watch it. I think that this is a solid, good, bad movie. Have fun, watch with your friends, make fun of shirtless Karl Urban.
And I feel like it's a good movie for sort of being like, okay, let's create like a drinking game when there's something that's really like dismissive or misogynist, dismissive of women or misogynist, drink. When there's something that really feeds into problematic ahistorical white supremacist narratives, take a drink.
So listeners, please do that and then let us know after how drunk you got.
Yes, it's pretty bad.
Also, disclaimer, if you harm yourself, I do not accept any responsibility.
Neither do I. None.
Miti, first of all, thank you so much for joining me for this episode.
Fun.
And second, are there places where the listeners could find you on the internet?
Xavier University History Department website is the only real place. I do have Twitter, but I mostly post early morning photos from campus. And I'm not saying that I'm just trying to rub being an early riser into everyone's face, but campus is just really pretty in the mornings. I also post about Xavier University Theater. I obsess about the library's Twitter feed. So I really don't recommend anyone who follows me, because you could just follow Xavier Theater and Library directly. And you could just like get up at 5:30 a.m. and photograph pretty statues of Jesuits all by yourself.
What is your Twitter handle?
It's at M. von Weissenberg.
Okay.
Very creative.
So people could follow you on Twitter
if they could spell my name.
Yes. Well, the show, it'll be in the show notes. It'll be given away. Sorry.
Do you want me to send you links to like the YouTube clips of Ofelas, the Norwegian movie?
Yeah, absolutely. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe in your preferred podcatcher app and rate and review on Apple Podcasts. I'll read new 5-star reviews in future episodes. And please also follow the podcast on Twitter at medievalpod and join our Facebook group. And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Sarah F. Decker. If you have any questions or suggestions, I would love to hear from you via email at media.evilpod@gmail.com. Thank you again, Miti, for joining me. This was awesome.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. It's always nice to meet other lovers of bad historical movies.
Yes. And thank you all for listening to Media Evil. Bye.
Thank you all. Take care of your livers watching this movie.